Hey folks. Over the course of this year, I started and now finished a wee series known as The Lore of Zelda's Famous Locations. Videos where we explored and examined key locations across every single 3D Zelda game, from the classic Ocarina of Time to my favourite Twilight Princess, the origins of Skyward Sword to the Great Sea of the Wind Waker. All of these games have been explored in this series, and as these videos are brilliant to have on whilst you, say, cook dinner, study for a test, clean your room, or maybe even go to sleep, which I'm absolutely not offended at by the way if you do. It's quite the compliment. I've put each episode of the series into one massive marathon of Zelda location lore. But don't worry, there's no running involved in this one. Unless you like to listen to videos while doing that, then enjoy. Oh, and this series took a lot of time and effort, so if you don't mind, be sure to drop a cheeky wee like down below, and consider subscribing to the channel to help support the video and future Zelda content. Now folks, please get yourself comfy, ready to cook, clean, study, or sleep, and as always, be sure to go grab yourself a delicious snack and drink. Take a photo and send them my way for a chance to be featured right here. And now, please enjoy my series, The Lore of Zelda's Famous Locations, in its entirety. Enjoy. Let's start with the area where this adventure begins, Skyloft. The floating settlement that is home to the humans, yet to become Hylians. This is where Link first wakes up and we kick off the adventure from. It's a very unique location as it's quite literally a set of floating islands. It includes a shopping market known as the Skyloft Bazaar, the famous Knight Academy, a graveyard, the waterfall cave, and of course Beedle's airship shop flying above. The people of Skyloft are also known to travel by bird. Loftwings are these large birds that people have learned to train and ride for travel, which is very necessary due to their geography. In fact, if you were to fall off the island day or night, there will always be people ready to swoop down and save you from falling to a most certain death. But how exactly is this possible? We don't see any fans or technology keeping it afloat like other floating locations such as the City in the Sky, nor magic at play like the Zonai Sky Islands. Well, the story and lore behind this location is extremely rich. Prior to the events of Skyward Sword, we are told a tale, the tale of the Demon King's invasion to the surface. Far below those clouds that sit below Skyloft as a surface land. Long ago, before this island existed, the humans lived here in peace, until one day, the Demon King and his demon army broke through the crusts of the surface and invaded. Forests were burnt to ash, monuments destroyed to rubble, rivers dripped with blood, and the demon army murdered without hesitation. They were after a great power held by the goddess, one unmatched to anything ever known. A divine light. In an attempt to protect this power, the goddess moved her people, as well as this sacred power, to the heavens high above, protecting both from the demons of the surface. The land she created for her people in the heavens above would come to be known as Skyloft. Following this, the goddess returned to the surface to battle alongside the surface dwellers to fight off the demons, and eventually, peace was returned. The origins of this settlement are directly connected to the goddess herself, as well as her divine power, which we eventually go on to discover for ourselves atop the mighty goddess statue that is for a time connected to Skyloft, but later dropped down to the surface and connected to the sealed temple, which we'll be visiting later in the video. Now, prior to the statue falling down there, we venture into a secret dungeon that is actually below the statue that is accessed after the Silent Realm trial of Skyloft. Following the completion of the trial, Link must insert the Stone of Trials into the empty hollow of a bird statue on the island. This reveals the Skykeep dungeon, which is a sort of trial in itself as it's made up of tons of rooms based on each of the previous dungeons, as well as some of its own unique puzzles. Fun fact, this is actually the only main dungeon in the entire Zelda series to not feature a boss. Not only that, but it's where Link discovers the 3 pieces of the divine power that was hidden away long ago. Link discovers the Triforce and wishes for the Demon King to be put to bed. This is when the statue and Skykeep disconnect from Skyloft and slot perfectly beside the sealed temple, revealing to us that it was once part of this location. as well as sealing away the imprisoned for good. God, I hate that avocado wish. As for the rest of the lore of Skyloft itself, there are some more interesting points to note. For example, the goddess statue, when it is a part of Skyloft in the early stages of the game, is where we first meet Link's companion for the game, Fi, or Fi depending on how you say it. Inside the statue he discovers the goddess sword, which throughout the course of his adventure he forges it bit by bit with the 3 sacred flames, eventually creating the Master Sword. The Master Sword that we see time and time again throughout the course of the entire Zelda series started right here in Skyloft. This hero forged it, so this one area of Skyloft alone contains an immense amount of lore, from protecting the Triforce from Demise and his demon army, to containing the original blade that went on to become the Master Sword. But there is more to Skyloft. There are the likes of the Knight Academy, a school for the Knights of Skyloft and the home of the famous Wing Ceremony, which is an annual event where the training knights compete to advance in their class. The winner of this event is honoured by taking part in a reenactment of being the hero of the past, alongside another student playing the role of the goddess. A tradition that has been done here since the school's establishment, which was 25 years prior to the events of the game. In the case of the game, the winner happens to be Link, and the student playing the goddess is Zelda, which is funny considering Zelda is actually the mortal form of the goddess herself. She just doesn't know it yet. There is also the Light Tower on the far side of Skyloft, which is used during Link's quest to find Zelda. It's used to clear and open through the thick Thunderhead storm, as Link must make his way in there. It's activated by playing the Ballad of the Goddess, as that holds the hidden instructions to use the tower. It also requires Link to use the Gust Bellows and play to Fi's beat in order to rotate the tower, and open up a way into the Thunderhead. Skyloft is a wonderful place. It's full of life and character. The people are lovely, it has a few minor mysteries to follow, and all round looks really pretty. The lore goes deep, and is gradually discovered more and more as the story progresses, and Link returns between dungeons down on the surface. Something really interesting as well is that the surface dwellers, such as the Gorons, do actually know of Skyloft to some degree. Gorko says to Link that, according to the ancient text, there is some kind of place up above, called the Isle of the Goddess, far up in the sky, which is referring to the section of Skyloft containing the goddess statue and Skykeep. After all, this is a part of Hyrule's origin story, so it's no surprise that the lore goes so deep. It's really awesome to explore and learn about. The next location we'll be visiting is technically a province of the surface. The Faron region makes up 1/3 of the explorable surface, and the reason I want to cover the region as a whole, for its more general famous locations, is because Skyward Sword is unique, in that Link returns to these locations more than once. So for the sake of organising how I go through each location, I figured I'd do it by region, and visit that region's individual famous locations, then move on to another region and do the same. With exception to extremely standout locations, which we'll get to later on. You know, gotta save the best for last. This is the first wider region Link explores on the surface, and it's worlds apart from his home high above. It's a luscious green forest with thick woodlands and strange life. He discovers Gorons down here as he helps Gorok from a group of red bokoblins, yet another new life form but hostile. But the main species in this area is the Kikwi, small, furry, part-plant creatures of the woods. They're a peaceful race of herbivores, and were one of the land dwellers that fought alongside Hylia back during the war against the Demon King. Link meets these friendly dudes all over the region. Now, as for the first famous location we'll be visiting down here, we look to the Skyview Temple in Skyview Spring. I tend not to focus too heavily on the dungeons as dungeons in this series, but as a location, it's pretty cool. A nature-dense, lost-to-time temple, filled with vines, fungi, and crawling with enemies. It's an ancient forest temple that we don't really learn the original purpose of, but I guess could be made that it was for worship, to be thankful for the green nature of the area, but that is purely a guess and nothing more. It has a theme of light and sky, with the boss room having a sun design on the floor. Perhaps in the ancient past it was used to view the heavens above, but in its now ruined state that isn't possible. Following the boss battle against Girahim, Link gains access to the Skyview Spring, a familiar sight to those who have played Breath of the Wild, as that game has the Spring of Courage, which strongly resembles this spring. This location contains crucial lore for the story, as in the centre, Link can find a goddess crest below a smaller goddess statue. If struck, Fi will translate a message from the gods to Link, and be presented with the Ruby Tablet, a relic that allows him to access the Elden region. But the Faron adventure doesn't end there. Well, it does for the time being, but the hero does return later in the game in search of one of the 3 sacred flames required to strengthen his sword. After doing a Silent Realm trial here, he follows along a questline to get Farore's sacred flame. In doing so, he meets the water dragon, helps the dragon, and gains access to the ancient cistern, the game's 4th dungeon. As a location, the lore here is quite fascinating. It's a Buddhism-inspired temple, which appears to be based on the short story The Spider's Thread, as below the pristine golden top half of the location lies a dark malice-fueled bottom. When Link ventures down here, he gains access back to the top by climbing a thin white spider web-like rope, with bokoblins crawling up trying to escape as well. The dungeon itself is worked around water-based puzzles. It's quite relaxing in looks, but that's not to be misunderstood as it is still crawling with foes. Upon defeating the boss Koloktos, Link gains access to an ancient room containing Farore's flame, the first of 3 required to enhance his blade. Gaining this flame turns the goddess sword into the goddess longsword, an improved version, but not yet the final blade. Across Faron, these are 2 notable locations, with one more major location that we'll visit in due time. But for now, let's take a look somewhere else on the surface. To the north of the surface, we can find the Elden Volcano region, a scorching hot magma pot containing a massive scalable volcano, along with an ancient temple and sanctuary deep within the region. This location is home to the Mogma race, one of the 5 races that stood with Hylia during the battle against Demise. This location was once peaceful, but now it's a hostile environment. The volcano is angry, and the region is crawling with monsters. The first notable location I'd like to highlight is the volcano summit. This is the home of the dragon protector that looks over this land, Elden. It's a super hot part of an already blistering region. The summit is a sort of cave, shrine-like area, and we actually speak with Elden during our quest for the game's 6th dungeon, the Fire Sanctuary. This is all in order to retrieve another sacred flame. The sanctuary itself is a beautiful palace, castle-like structure that is built both inside and outside the mountain. It uses fire as a form of technology, as we see large flames blocking entrances. It's a very divine place, and was likely used for some form of worship, going off all of the statues and designs, but it's now littered with enemies, and makes up the game's 6th dungeon. Then there is the Earth Temple, the game's 2nd dungeon, which is found at the top of the volcano climb. The entrance is a grand spectacle, looking over the lava flow going down, but it's what's on the inside that is truly magnificent. It's an ancient temple in worship to the dragons. In this case, you'd assume Elden. The dragon structures and designs on the walls are amazing. It's clearly old and in a bit of a decaying state, as mainly pathways have crumbled into the lava. It's not connected in lore as far as we're aware, but the Earth Temple actually has a twin location in the Wind Waker, as that game also has an Earth Temple. Though they're not exactly too similar, so it's likely just a shared name. Exploring old temples like this, especially in the time frame of the land before it was even Hyrule, really makes me wonder what these old locations were like in their prime. Did the Mogma come here to worship Elden, or was it more of the humans when they lived down here? It was said to have once been peaceful, so there's every chance of it. One final famous location that has to be mentioned in Elden is the Earth Spring. Found just after completing the Earth Temple, the game's other sacred spring is discovered here, and much like the Skyview Spring, this one also holds a strong resemblance to that of the springs in the Wilds era. Only this version is underground. Hidden deep within the Earth Temple, Link actually catches up to Zelda and Impa here, only for Impa to scold Link for taking too long. The pair then leave and Link is left to perform a Skyward Strike to receive another gift from the gods. This time, the Amber Tablet, which when brought back to the heavens, it opens up a gap in the cloud barrier to access the Lineru region, which we'll be heading to shortly. The location lore of Elden is massively made up by its dungeons, but what it also serves as is a predecessor of sorts to Death Mountain, the volcano we often find time and time again within the Elden region of Hyrule. This is Death Mountain before Death Mountain, and seeing it in such an old and raw form, is a really cool part of the game. In the west of the surface, we can find the Lanayru region, a large dried out desert, teeming with lost history. Once a vast green landscape, inhabited by the ancient robots, which in themselves are really cool and hold their own mysteries as to their origins. The first major location here of significance in terms of lore would be the Lanayru mining facility. This is the third dungeon in the game, but aside from being a dungeon, it's a hefty location in terms of lore. It was once a factory or refinery of some kind that produces timeshift stones, an ancient piece of technology originating from the Lanayru region that allowed for a certain radius around one of the stones to rewind time, shifting from the present to the past. This is the key mechanic of not just this dungeon, but the majority of the Lanayru region. It's said that it was the main industrial complex of an ancient civilization, now no longer around. The facility is initially buried deep beneath the sand. In order to uncover it, Link must activate 3 power nodes, working alongside the ancient robots and their technology to bring the mining facility up. The insides show us truly just how advanced this technology is, especially when you consider that this technology is from a time long ago, likely as far back as when humans roamed the surface. It has artificial lighting, conveyor belts, electric-like fencing, and a full-scale operation going on here. It's quite something, and one heck of a feat for being an ancient structure. It's a wee bit mysterious, as we never truly learn the origin of the ancient robots in this facility, just that it exists all throughout the Lanayru region, and we'll be looking at more of their impressive technology in the next couple locations. But firstly, there is another lore-packed location that comes directly after the mining facility. Upon completion of the dungeon, Link gains access to the original Temple of Time, an open concept courtyard with a large rock crest towering over. This is the original Temple of Time, predating that of Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and so on. Not found in central Hyrule like the others, but rather far out in the desert. It contains the original Gate of Time as well, a portal that can take you into the past. Though when Link arrives, he is met to see Impa and Zelda confronted by Girahim, and he must help protect them and aid their escape. But as they escape and hand over the Goddess Harp to Link, Impa blows the Gate of Time up to ensure that Girahim cannot follow. But what this means is that Link must now create a new gate, which kicks off the quest for the second half of the game, where Link must seek out the Sacred Flames and ultimately turn the Goddess Sword into the Master Sword. Another lore-significant location of Lanayru is the Ancient Sand Sea, a sand-covered desert that, when affected by timeshift technology, reveals that there was once a body of water here. The Lanayru Sea. Link ventures throughout this vast lost sea, only visible in small portions through the timeshift technology, but it's honestly a massive body of water if you were to see it in full, and seeing this back in its prime would have been something special to see. During Link's adventure, he travels through the ancient shipyard, pirate stronghold, and eventually the game's 5th dungeon, the Sand Ship. A large ship that Girahim made invisible to hide it from Link, all because it contains one of the sacred flames the hero is after. The Sand Ship also strives off the ancient timeshift technology, and back in its day must have sailed this ancient water with great pride. But the final challenge of this dungeon really intrigues me. The boss, Levias, whilst a wee bit of a laughing stock within the Zelda community due to how easy the battle is, does beg a massive question. If this giant creature is found here, what else was found in these waters? The sea must have been packed with life beneath the waves, and that in itself is a big mystery. The whole area is a bit of a mystery in terms of lore. I would have loved to have seen the entire sea in its prime, as well as the Lanayru region in general, but in the adventure we play through, we only see it through small areas via the timeshift technology. Now for one of my personal favourite locations in Skyward Sword, the Isle of Songs. A small island formation made up of 2 small islands, the second of which is a large puzzle. But most interestingly about this isle is that it's found within the Thunderhead, a giant storm cloud that suddenly appeared. On the inside flies Levias, but is plagued by a parasite which Link must defeat. The Isle of Songs is a crucial part of Link creating the Master Sword, and that's why I really love this place. It's here that he learns Farore's courage, Nehru's wisdom, and Din's power. When played here, they summon trial gates which aid Link in his quest to seek out the sacred flames, to temper the Goddess Sword into the Master Sword. It's never really explained who made this place and for how long it has existed, but we can assume it dates back to the humans on the surface, in deep connection to Hylia. This location is vital in the story, as ultimately, without learning the songs, Link cannot access the trials. Without the trials, he cannot find the sacred flames. Without the sacred flames, he cannot upgrade the Goddess Sword. And without the Goddess Sword being upgraded and tempered into the Master Sword, he cannot form the Gate of Time. And without the Gate of Time, they cannot travel into the past. It's such a small wee location, but plays an integral role to the story and lore of Skyward Sword. Now for one of the most important locations on the surface, the Sealed Temple / Sealed Grounds. Formerly known as the Temple of Hylia, before the large statue was moved to the heavens and formed a part of Skyloft. This is actually the first location Link visits when he first ventures down to the surface, and it's here he meets Impa, watching over the old temple. It's here that Zelda confines herself in the past, within this large amber-coloured crystal, and Impa is actually sitting over this. You don't know it upon first venturing here, but that is in fact Zelda sealed within, and we'll get into exactly how and why this happens shortly. A very cool piece of lore to know about the Sealed Temple is that it's actually a predecessor to the Temple of Time that we see appear in Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, Breath of the Wild, and so on, being a time-fiend temple where the Master Sword is laid to rest, which is exactly what happens at the end of Skyward Sword. Link leaves the Blade of Evil's Bane right here after sealing away Demise. It's one of the most emotional scenes in the Zelda series, as Fi, Link's companion, must leave his side in order to reside within the blade. In later games, we'd seen little nods to show us that Fi is still alive and well within the blade. Not only is this a predecessor to the Temple of Time, but this also has a sister temple found within Skyward Sword itself, the previously mentioned location being found in Lanayru. Though that one is quite different, as it's an open concept temple. It's the original Temple of Time, and is home to a Gate of Time. Or was. A magical piece of work which would soon be replicated right here at the Sealed Temple. The most important lore to know about these grounds is the events that took place here during the battle against the demon army. In the era of the goddess Hylia, we know that the demon army broke through the crusts of the surface and invaded. Hylia, in an attempt to save the humans, sent them to the heavens. This was along with the mighty goddess statue, sealing away the sacred relic the demon army sought after. The Sealed Temple is a crucial part of Hylian history. If it wasn't for part of it being sent into the sky high above the clouds, then the humans might not have even survived, and if they hadn't survived, then Hyrule might have never even been established. Later into the game, when Link has the Goddess Harp and has learned the sacred songs required for story progression, he returns to the temple for Impa to teach him how to rebuild the Gate of Time. This allows the hero to visit in the past or present, which is a big part of the game, and it's ultimately required to save the Thunder Dragon with the Life Tree Fruit, which requires venturing into the past, but where this gate comes in most important is towards the grand finale of the game. Following the goddess Hylia statue and Skykeep below returning to the surface, plugging this hole and the imprisoned for good, just as we feel things are going well, as Link, Groose, Impa and Zelda stand around the Gate of Time newly created within the temple, Girahim shows up and kidnaps Zelda. He takes her through the gate and into the past, as back in that age he can use her and revive his master. This is followed by Link chasing after them into the past and slashing his way through a horde of bokoblins, going face to face with Girahim to then reach the final boss. This all takes place on the Sealed Grounds. Girahim is revealed to be but merely the Blade of Demise, and as the story reaches climax, Demise is reborn. We follow the Demon King into battle, but before going into that realm, let's go over the last bit of lore on the Sealed Temple. Following the final boss battle, with Link victorious, he returns to the temple, and one of the most important moments in Zelda lore takes place here. The Master Sword that the hero forged throughout this adventure is laid to rest here. With the remains of Demise due to dissolve to time sealed within, as well as Fi, the spirit within the blade set to remain inside for the rest of time. This scene is known as Fi's farewell, and is one of the most emotional cutscenes in the entire Zelda series. Fi, the artificial being that slowly becomes more and more human-like, forming a real connection to Link, must leave him at the end, and it's just hard to take in. Following this, with the temple back in its original form, we see some of those from the sky venture down here, and in the conversation between Link and Zelda, at the end, the story concludes with the decision to stay down here. This is the beginning of Hyrule. Shortly after these events, sometime before the events of the Minish Cap, the second game in the Zelda timeline, the Kingdom of Hyrule is formed, with Zelda at the helm. This is the origin of Hyrule, the kingdom that we play the majority of games in. It all started right here. Now for the final famous location in Skyward Sword. Demise's Realm. A location that doesn't have an official name, but is known by its simple appearance. This is where the hero and Demon King come face to face at the end of the game. An open plain with shallow water across the surface, reflecting the sky above and appearing as a sort of never-ending realm. It's a fair battle. Neither Link nor Demise have the advantage here. It's a true one-on-one duel. As the battle begins, the sky turns dark, and during the battle, there's a storm, which actually goes in favour of both Link and Demise, as it allows them to attract the lightning to their blades and perform much more powerful strikes. This is where Link defeats the Demon King, but before seeing the last of Demise, he lays down a curse, that for all of time, his hatred will be reincarnated, and this is the lore behind why Hyrule continues to be plagued by evil time and time again. Following this, Link holds the Master Sword high and absorbs Demise's remains into the blade, eradicating Demise and leaving what's left of him to diminish within the blade of Evil's Bane. Let's start this lore dive in the central heart of the kingdom. This is where we find Hyrule Castle, the second most northern location in the game, second to Death Mountain. This is the home of Hyrule's royalty. It's a white brick castle with blue tile-top peaks, a classic medieval fantasy style. It's heavily guarded as you'd expect. There are many guards in the castle grounds leading up to the main entrance, as well as a fence, a moat, and a drawbridge. It's a solid home for the royals. Speaking of which, this is where we first meet Princess Zelda, after Link sneaks through the gardens to her wee private courtyard. We know that the King of Hyrule, and whilst not mentioned, we can assume that the Queen also lives here. It's never really said if there is currently a Queen or not during the events of Ocarina of Time. The castle also overlooks the famous Castle Town, the hub of Hyrule and home to many of its people. The town is also surrounded by a moat and large walls with a drawbridge connecting to Hyrule Field, so the castle itself is technically guarded by a double moat, as well as the large Castle Town walls. As you can imagine, a lot of significant events would have taken place here. One in particular takes place during our adventure. When Link ventures to the castle to seek out Princess Zelda, when he does find her in the castle courtyard, they take a peek inside the throne room where we see Ganondorf, the King of Evil, pledging allegiance to the King of Hyrule, though this allegiance and sign of peace would soon be revealed to be nothing but a lie. Prior to reaching her, we had seen Ganondorf already, within Link's nightmare during the opening of the game. The hero could see that this man was evil and plotting for Hyrule's downfall, though as two kids they couldn't do anything. Zelda herself mentions that she just knows something isn't right with this man, and in a chilling fashion, Ganondorf swiftly turns his head towards the pair. This false allegiance would turn out to be one of the biggest mistakes in the kingdom's history, as a little later on, once Link has completed the first 3 dungeons and collected the 3 spiritual stones, he gains access to the Master Sword chamber in the Temple of Time, and when he draws the blade, a gateway to the sacred realm is opened, and Link is left helpless as he becomes sealed within for 7 years. But more importantly, as he draws the blade, Ganondorf snuck in. The King of Evil managed to find his way into the Sacred Realm, where he can find the Triforce, the holy relic of the Zelda universe. The reason he swore allegiance to the king was to be able to get this close, and his plan worked out brilliantly. This then kicks off the rest of the game, but it's kinda crazy that all of this started when Ganondorf swore his allegiance to the king at Hyrule Castle. Though there is still more highly significant lore that involves this castle. Prior to the events of the game, the Hyrulean Civil War took place. This war was for control of the kingdom, and ultimately ended in the unification of Hyrule under one banner. This includes Ganondorf swearing his allegiance, placing the Gerudo Desert under the control of Hyrule, though Ganondorf only did this to gain the king's trust and move freely across Hyrule. It's not super clear on how this war first broke out, or any significant battles, but with Hyrule Castle being the home of Hylian royalty, you can imagine that their plans and operation was primarily based from the castle, with the king and his high-ranked knights forming strategies and plans, opening negotiation with others in the war. Lots would have gone on here during this war. On top of that, we also know that the Sheikah tribe work as servants to the royal family of Hyrule, and prior to the events of the game, we know that Kakariko Village was exclusively a Sheikah settlement, which was also home to some seriously dark stuff that the royal family were behind as well. So it's likely that a lot of work between the two also happened here at the castle, particularly in relation to the war. That's the main lore to know about the castle. However, there are some smaller details that are quite cool. For example, when Link is caught trespassing on the grounds on his way to find Princess Zelda, if he's caught outside the inner castle, he'll be escorted back to the main entrance by Castletown. But if he is caught within the castle, he is only escorted out to the secret entrance he snuck in from, so he's still trespassing. Just a funny little detail. Whilst in the courtyard, if you take a wee peek in the windows, you'll be able to see framed pictures of Mario characters on the walls. A fun little nod to another extremely successful and popular Nintendo 64 game. Another interesting mystery about the castle is the statue found on the way to the courtyard. We don't really know who this is depicting. Potentially a past hero? Potentially the king. I'm not too sure. I did a video about it a little while ago if you'd like to check it out, but to this day, I'm still not 100% sure. This is the landmark of Hyrule, and contains some very significant lore. The castle undergoes a massive change halfway through the story, but we'll leave that lore dive for a little later on in the video. In the northeast of Hyrule, we can find the previously mentioned Kakariko Village. Founded by the Sheikah, sitting beneath Death Mountain, and home to some seriously lore-heavy locations. In the modern day, Kakariko is a home for all, no longer exclusive to just the Sheikah, and this is thanks to Impa, Kakariko born and raised, and the current leader figure of the Sheikah tribe. She opened the doors to the poor commoners of Hyrule, growing the village and establishing it as a welcome home for all. It's a growing work in progress and is visited often throughout the game for a number of reasons. The first is when Link makes his way to Death Mountain. The only accessible path is found in Kakariko Village, guarded by a royal knight and only ever opened if one has the permission of the king, but this is just the beginning of what the village contains. Kakariko is home to some seriously deep lore. For example, at the back of the Kakariko graveyard we can find a large tombstone. If moved and entered, this leads us to the royal family tomb, the place of rest for those of the royal family. It's a chilling tomb with toxic water, monster infestation, and the resting place of royals of the past. It also contains the Sun Song at the end, a famous work of the composer brothers. There's also the bottom of the well, an ordinary looking well situated in the village, but deep down inside is a mini dungeon, and the location where Link can find the powerful Sheikah artifact, the Lens of Truth. A lens that when looked through can reveal what is not possible to see by the naked eye, such as false walls, hidden treasure, and even enemies. It's not mandatory to venture down the well, but without the Lens of Truth, it makes a few sections of the game very difficult. When the well is first discovered as Child Link, it's filled with water and is inaccessible. However, as an adult, it's drained, but the bottom is blocked in. In order to enter, Link must return to the past as a child, play the Song of Storms to the phonogram man inside the windmill hut, causing the mill to supercharge and drain the water. The insides of the well are creepy. It's a damp dungeon filled with illusionary walls and tricky puzzles, as well as the lens of truth. Professor Shikashi says this about the well. A long time ago, there was a man in this very village who had an eye they said could see the truth. Now, usually, you have to train your mind's eye most strenuously to actually see the truth. But this fella, no. They said he had a different way of doing things. His house stood where the well is now. Quite the interesting bit of history, considering this is directly referencing the item we find down in the well. Perhaps that man the professor speaks of was the creator of the lens. That previously mentioned windmill hut is also a massive piece of Zelda lore in itself, arguably the most interesting and well-known paradox, as when Link first meets the phonogram man inside playing a melody to the rotation of the mill, he seems happy. However, when Link ventures into the future, the man is angry, directly at a young child who taught him a song on his ocarina, a song that caused the windmill to turn without stop. This young boy is referring to Link, but how could he have taught the man if we never did that? Well, here's the paradox. In the future, Link learns the song, and then goes back into the past to teach it to the man, completing the paradox. Confusing, right? There's also the infamous House of Skulltula. Inside, it's a bare home covered by cobwebs and old ruined furniture. We can find symbols of the Sheikah inside, as well as portraits of spiders. According to Professor Shikashi, an extremely rich family once lived here, but were cursed due to greed. When Link enters, he can find the cursed rich man and his 5 sons, who appear as Skulltulas. The only way to lift this curse is for Link to collect all of the golden Skulltulas found across Hyrule. Link will be rewarded with rupees for helping them, as well as return the home to a normal state. However, the utmost lore-heavy part of Kakariko Village is found at the top end of the graveyard. This is where Link gains access to the game's 7th dungeon, the Shadow Temple. The reason we venture in here to begin with is chilling in itself. After Ganondorf rises to power in Hyrule, a great evil being that was imprisoned at the bottom of the well manages to escape, wreaking havoc in Kakariko, setting the village ablaze and knocking both Impa and Link down. The evil retreats to the head of the graveyard, which is where we can find the entrance to the Shadow Temple. The location has themes of fear and death, blood-stained walls, and a chilling atmosphere that sets in at the speed of light. Walking around the Shadow Temple is like a nightmare. There are terrifying devices all over. Blades, traps, and horrible devices, but what's even worse is that this isn't your typical evil's doing. This is the property of the royal family. Hyrule's monarch had the Sheikah take their enemies here to interrogate, torture, and sometimes worse. This is such a dark part of Hyrule's history that it has become taboo to even talk about, and the Hyrulean royal family are essentially trying to bury this piece of their history. The bloodshed found in here, along with the awful torture devices, are all on the royals' hands. This was used during wars and conflicts. I can't even begin to imagine the sounds of Hyrule's enemies that were taken here. The screams, the bloodshed, and, most chilling of all, the silence that comes after. It's even said that this place was built with bones, and that the traps and devices in here would help add to that collection. It's never really said who built the temple, only that the royals and Sheikah used it. Regardless, it's a horrible part of Hyrule's history, and is where Link seeks out the game's 7th boss, Bongo Bongo, a great evil that we don't know the origins of. Thankfully on the outside, the Blue Juggler and other residents of Kakariko managed to stop the fires that the beast created, and ultimately, Kakariko Village was saved. In the heart of Hyrule Field, we can find Lon Lon Ranch, the home of Hyrule's famous Lon Lon milk. as well as where we first meet our horse, Epona. This is the home of Talon and his daughter Malon, as well as Ingo, made up of one house, one barn and a farm. They produce that famous milk drank across the entire kingdom, but it's also home to cuckoos and horses, which is quite an important part of this story, as this is where Link first meets Epona as a child. Young Malon teaches Link Epona's song, which would come in handy later on in the adventure as this song summons the horse. It's quite a peaceful life here, but when Ganondorf's reign began, things took a turn. Following the King of Evil's takeover, Talon was kicked out. The father of Malon was forced to be separated from his child as she remained at the ranch working away under the nasty leadership of Ingo, who had become corrupt to Ganondorf. He even promises the King of Evil a mighty fine horse. However, when Link shows up, he finds himself in a betting race with Ingo, eventually putting Epona on the line, and when Link wins this bet, Ingo changes his mind, locking the gates and refusing to give Epona up to Link. And in the most badass fashion, we can choose to escape with Epona by either jumping the ranch gate or jumping the outer fence into Hyrule Field. And sometime following this, Malon informs Link that Ingo gave up control and that Malon will soon return. This is the first place we meet Epona, and she'd go on to become a reoccurring character as Link's mighty steed in future installments to the series. In the east of Hyrule, deep within the Lost Woods, we can find a magical settlement known as Kokiri Forest, the home of the Kokiri tribe, guardian of the forest, and the starting place for this adventure. This is where Ocarina of Time begins, with Link waking up in his wee treehouse home. It's a whimsical place to live, but is only accessible to the Kokiri due to the surrounding protection of the Lost Woods. Though, Link is not Kokiri, rather a Hylian. So just how and why does he start out here? Prior to the events of Ocarina of Time during the war, a Hylian mother fleeing the war found herself escaping into the Lost Woods with her baby. In a desperate attempt to provide a safe life for her child, she hands the baby over to the guardian of the forest, the Great Deku Tree, and he takes the child into his protection. Years later, we start our adventure as that baby, but now growing into a child. This is why Link doesn't have a fairy like the rest of the Kokiri children, not until his great quest is called upon by the Great Deku Tree, when he's assigned Navi. The forest is known as the source of life, maintaining order and keeping others outside of the Forbidden Forest. The Kokiri Forest is surrounded by the Lost Woods, which it's said that no Kokiri can enter in an attempt to leave, or they will die. This is why Link is able to leave. He isn't Kokiri. The forest is a magical place, and where we as the player get to grips with the controls, the Great Deku Tree even being the first dungeon in the game. It's a protected and important place, but once Ganondorf takes the crown, things change. When Link returns as an adult, he'll find the forest to be overrun. Enemies are inside the settlement, and the Kokiri children are trapped inside hiding in fear. It's quite different to how we first saw it. The Great Deku Tree is still a bit of a dead hollow remain. However, after venturing to the Forest Temple and completing the dungeon, a new Deku Tree sprouts in front of the former, and it's through talking to this wee sprout that Link learns of his history, the story of his mother fleeing war, and leaving him in the trust of the forest. The Lost Woods that surround the village is a famous location in itself. A strange magic flows through these woods. It's a maze, but with an unexplainable pattern. Wrong turns will take you back to where you began. Pathways look identical and will play tricks on you. Patterns must be followed to reach your destination. It's purposefully near impossible to traverse to protect the locations within. It's said that those who become lost turn into Stalfos, and that the Skull Kids we see in the Lost Woods were once Kokiri children who left the village. In the north of Hyrule, we can find the towering mountain that looks over the kingdom, Death Mountain. Home to the rock-eating Gorons, forgers of blades, and containing some fascinating locations such as Dodongo's Cavern and the Fire Temple. In order to even set foot on the mountain trail, Link must first acquire the king's permission, which you'll gain on a written note. The entrance is guarded in Kakuko Village, but once through, a young Link will quickly realise why this route is off limits. It's a grueling tough journey to the top. rockfall is quite frequent. Small, tedious enemies are found all the way up. But if the young hero makes his way up, he'll find Goron City, the home of the rock-eating Gorons, a brotherly tribe that have a really cool culture within their home. They're very tribal and close-knit, friendly and inviting people. The nature of this mountain is unique, as the clouds that sit above Death Mountain can tell us from afar the state of the mountain, whether things are well or if there is a problem. As a child, Link ventures into Dodongo's cavern in search of the Goron Ruby in order to gain access to the Master Sword. This is a cavern a little further down the mountain that is home to many Dodongos, large lizard creatures native to the mountain, with their big daddy king, King Dodongo, serving as the dungeon boss. As an adult, Link returns and goes even further in the mountain, entering the Fire Temple, which is only accessible with the fire-resistant red tunic, and by travelling through the mountain crater. Within this dungeon, Link learns that some Gorons are being kept as prisoners in the temple, one of the many horrible acts of Ganondorf as Hyrule's king. Even worse, the Gorons trapped in here were in line to be fed to the dungeon boss, Volvagia, the spirit of the mountain, an ancient dragon that was once slayed, but Ganondorf decided to resurrect. It's Link's job now with the mighty Megaton Hammer to put the dragon down once again. This game gives us our first look at the Gorons and their home, and is a brilliant look at their culture and history all within the mountain. We even get hands-on experience with some of the Gorons' famous forging skills, as we get to use the Begoron sword created by Begoron himself. In the northeast of Hyrule, we can find a unique home to a unique race of people. This is where we'll find Zora's Domain, home of the Zora people and their royalty, King Zora and his daughter Princess Ruto. It's a system of beautiful caverns filled with water and waterfalls. It connects to the Zora River as well as a secret tunnel that leads to Lake Hylia. This is the central hub of Hyrule's water flow, if you like. In order for Link to first enter, he needs to play Zelda's Lullaby at the top of the Zora River in order to open a pathway inside. His reason for being here is in his quest to find the Zora Sapphire, one of the 3 spiritual stones. It's found inside Lord Jabu Jabu, a sacred deity that resides above Zora's domain within the Zora's Fountain. In past games, the Zora were hostile enemies that would attack Link. However, in Ocarina of Time they were for the first time depicted as friendly and welcoming. When Link obtains the Zora Sapphire after exploring and beating the game's 3rd dungeon, which is actually the insides of Lord Jabu Jabu, he is given the relic by Princess Ruto. Though, without knowing how Zora customs work, the giving of this relic actually acts as an engagement. In this moment, Princess Ruto and Link become engaged, or promised to be, and later on in the story, as adult Link, this is brought back up, much to Link's surprise. Speaking of as an adult, if Link returns to the scenic domain, he'll find that Ganondorf's reign over Hyrule has also affected this location. It becomes frozen over, some parts being frozen in red ice, only meltable with a blue flame. This is caused due to Morpha, the boss of the water temple found below Lake Hylia, though we don't see the domain restored until the end credits of the game. There isn't a lot of lore known about the history of the domain, but we can assume that considering the Zora have their own monarchy system, that during the likes of the Hyrulean Civil War that took place before the events of Ocarina of Time, that significant discussions took place here, with the king, other royals, and possibly even others in the war to settle agreements and such. Regardless of it having less lore in the times of Ocarina of Time, it's still quite the beautiful location to look at. Connecting to that last location, the famous Lake Hylia is also a site of significance. Home to one of the game's dungeons, a laboratory, a fishing pond, and even an unexplained mystery that to this day we do not know the answer to. Found in the south of Hyrule, this lake is a stunning escape from the adventure, though it does tie into the adventure with the water temple found at the bottom of the lake. This was once a place that the Zora people used to worship the water spirits, though now has been overtaken by Ganondorf's evil. The lake has multiple islands, one of which contains a warp point for Link, but most interesting is that with the scratched tree. Here lies a tree with a large scratch on it, but just what creature left such a mark? We don't find many enemies here at the lake, and those that we do don't possess such claws to leave this. Interestingly, this claw mark only appears in the Nintendo 64 version of the game. It was removed in the 3DS remake. This could indicate that it held no significance, but taking that for an answer is just lame. A much cooler way to look at this is to suggest that perhaps a dragon that passed these lands left this mark, or a foul creature from the depths of the lake from long ago left its mark. But ultimately, there is no answer to this mystery. The fishing hole over beside the lake is one of the coolest little additions to the game in my opinion. I'm a very big fan of the fishing in Twilight Princess, and believe that Ocarina of Time did a pretty good job with fishing as well. An interesting piece of lore about the man who runs this pond is that his legacy goes on around 100 years after the events of this game in Twilight Princess. When we visit Henna's fishing hole in that game, we can see a photo of the fishing man from Ocarina of Time, and it's even hinted at him and Henna being related. There is also the laboratory, of course, where we can meet the lake scientist, a researcher who dedicates his time to marine biology. Interestingly, if you swim to the bottom of his indoor pool, you'll find a shark behind some bars. A truly terrifying discovery when first playing Ocarina of Time. Now for one of my favourite famous locations, the Gerudo Valley, an overall desert region. Found in the west of Hyrule, we can find a scorching hot region with various points of interest. First of all is the Gerudo Fortress, home to the Gerudo Warriors, an all-female race of well-built, combat-trained women who are quite the challenge to battle against, typically wielding dual blades and being extremely agile. Over the course of history, the Gerudo have been known to typically only have one male born every 100 years. This male is Ganondorf. In some games, the Gerudo are welcoming people. In others, they are quite hostile, which is the case in Ocarina of Time. Link must venture into their home to rescue some carpenters who were captured by the Gerudo, and this is no easy task. The Gerudo Fortress is an extremely heavily guarded place. The warriors are very well trained and very difficult to defeat in battle, but alas, Link manages to free the carpenters. And an interesting piece of lore about the fortress that you might already know if you watched my Lore of Zelda's famous locations on the Wind Waker is that this is the very same as the Forsaken Fortress seen in the Wind Waker. It's a little hard to believe at first looking at them side by side, but it's true. These are one of the same. Beyond here lies the Haunted Wasteland, a harsh and unforgiving desert that must not be taken lightly. It contains a never-ending sandstorm, very poor visibility, and a high chance of becoming lost. Before even being able to attempt to cross the wasteland, Link must pass 2 trials to prove he can realistically attempt such an adventure: the River of Sand and the Phantom Guide. Successfully completing these trials will lead Link across the Haunted Wasteland and lead him to the Desert Colossus, a massive structure found far out in the desert lands that is the home of the Spirit Temple, the game's 8th and final dungeon before the final showdown. The overall region in this game is quite harsh and difficult to traverse. It's still not long after the Hyrulean Civil War, where the Kingdom of Hyrule and Gerudo were heavily against each other, so it's an interesting location to experience, especially after knowing the history with Ganondorf and what went down between him and the King of Hyrule. Before getting into our final famous location of the video, there is one more specific site I'd like to visit. Found in Castletown, both before Ganondorf's takeover and after, stands the famous Temple of Time. a location that has appeared in several Zelda games, a sacred place, and one of the most integral parts of this game's story. This is the home of the Master Sword, sealed behind the Door of Time to protect the holy blade of evil's bane, but also because in the chamber that the sword resides is the entrance to the sacred realm. The Door of Time can only be opened with the presence of the three spiritual stones. This is why Link seeks them out as a child in order to get the Master Sword, but in an unexpected turn of events, Ganondorf had been following the hero all along, and managed to sneak into the sacred realm as Link drew the Master Sword, and ultimately, this led to Link being sealed within the sacred realm for 7 years as Ganondorf's reign over Hyrule begun. The temple is a reoccurring location and appears in multiple Zelda games in different forms. Typically, it is a pristine white temple, home to the Master Sword, and in Ocarina of Time it plays a vital role as we are required to come back here on a few occasions to put the blade back into its pedestal and travel back in time, before Ganondorf took over. But it's arguably what happens during the ending of Ocarina of Time that holds the most significance within this temple. After the adventure is over, Princess Zelda is filled with guilt for robbing Link of a childhood. Whilst it was necessary for the hero to take on this quest, he did miss out, so Link leaves the Master Sword back on the pedestal within the Temple of Time. He returns to being a child, and a new history is ready to be created. Now for the final famous location of the video, the fate that Hyrule Castle would fall to. Ganon's Castle. When the King of Evil took over Hyrule, this is the stronghold of a home that he built over the original Hyrule Castle, ripping up the land to create a pit of lava that acts as a sort of moat beneath. The castle itself is suspended high above and can only be entered with a magical bridge that is created with the help of all 6 sages. Now, not only did Ganondorf make this his new home, but he also destroyed Castletown just down the road, now overrun with re-deads and an empty shell of what it once was. The castle is made of this black brick and metal. A dark tower makes up the main piece of the stronghold and is one heck of a challenge to traverse inside. Aesthetically, it's the complete opposite of what Hyrule Castle was. It contains bite-sized dungeons, based on the previous dungeons we just traversed in order to progress through the tower. On the way up to Ganondorf, there are rooms filled with enemies that Link must go head to head with. All whilst the unsettling tower theme plays as Link climbs Ganondorf's fortress. And despite being in control of Ganondorf, we can still find symbols that would be more associated with the Hylians. Now, when he reaches the top, he finds Ganondorf in a large room, playing an organ. That music we were hearing was Ganondorf. And he has Zelda suspended above, trapped by his evil. This is where the final face-off begins. Link and Ganondorf go tit for tat here within the castle. At the top of his tower, the battle back and forth until Link manages to knock the King of Evil down. But rather than it being over, whilst Ganondorf is down, the tower begins to rumble. The pair do manage to escape. Feeling certain that Ganondorf has been dealt with, Link approaches the rubble, and in truly shocking fashion, Ganondorf rises from the ashes and turns into the true final boss of this game. Ganon. A large pig beast with 2 large blades and one goal: kill the hero of time. The final battle takes place here and is a showdown for the ages, but the hero with the aid of Princess Zelda triumphs and slays the beast, sealing him away, setting up Hyrule for an age of peace and recovery, putting an end to the era of Ganondorf's reign. Normally I start these videos at Hyrule Castle, however in Majora's Mask there is no Hyrule Castle, so we'll start at the next best thing, the hub of Termina, Clock Town. A dodecagon encased settlement in the heart of Termina. This is where Link's adventure truly gets underway as he enters from the clock tower. It's an extremely lively and bustling place. There's something going on around every corner. There's simply too many individual buildings and characters to highlight them all, but they are all really interesting to at least some degree. From the town bank to the laundry pool, the mayor's house to the trading post. It's full of life and cheerfulness despite the incoming moon ready to destroy it all, which is, funny enough, a big part of what gives the residents here their personality. We see true humanity here, as some residents are extremely concerned, as others just see it as a hoax that will pass. This is very real when bad situations arise, and it brings a unique flavour of emotion to Clocktown. It's split into 4 sections: North, South, West and East. The main site here is of course the Clock Tower, the place in which Link first emerges from after being turned into a Deku Scrub. This famous centrepiece of town plays a big part in the Carnival of Time, a celebration which is coming up in the next few days. This is a time where the people of Termina get together and pray for a good harvest in the coming year. At midnight of the carnival, people await the Clock Tower's entrance opening up, allowing access to the top of the tower so people can make their way up here and pray and sing ceremonial songs to the gods. This is very interesting lore which is easy to miss. This is also of course where Link finally catches up with the Skull Kid possessed by Majora's mask, and thankfully retrieves his ocarina in order to transform back into his Hylian form, as well as go back in time a few days and restart the 3-day cycle. Smaller points of interest to highlight are the fun designs of buildings both inside and out, but other than that there isn't much lore, so instead enjoy this brief highlight reel of some of the sites. To the south of Clocktown, we can find the Woodfall region, a forest covered in green, oddities round every corner, and a long-forgotten temple deep within. The first famous site I'd like to highlight in Woodfall is the Deku Palace, the home of Deku Scrubs. Formerly just minor characters found throughout the world in Ocarina of Time, but now expanded into their own miniature kingdom within the woods. This expansion of their lore is fascinating. The palace features many layers. It's first reached from the southern swamp, and we get a wee taste of the style with this wooden log wall, painted in Deku colours. Upon passing through here and reaching the outside of the palace, we see these massive walls, which contain 2 royal gardens, heavily guarded by Deku Scrubs. Link must sneak through both of these gardens in order to gain access to the royal chamber, or at least where the monkey is, as otherwise the Deku guards will throw him out. These grounds are strictly for the Deku only. On the inside we find the Deku King's chamber, which is a beautifully decorated room with a fire pit in the middle, as well as the prison cell previously mentioned on the left. This is where Link enters to help free the captured monkey. The overall design and culture of this place is very tribal and forest based. Everything is made of wood, decorated in tribal-like paints. They appear to grow plants in the gardens and generally live from the resources of the land. It's secure as can be, and I haven't even mentioned the moat of poisonous water that surrounds the palace. There's also a secret labyrinth known as the Deku Shrine, which Link can dare to adventure within if he wants to seek out the Mask of Sense. Now, when it comes to the lore and history of this place, we're left rather in the dark. As you might know, this game was made in a very short time period, so as well as reusing a lot of assets from Ocarina of Time, not everything has a ton of official information behind it. However, as a theory and lore enthusiast, I find questions to ask, such as, how long have the Deku Scrubs had this deep culture and life within the woods? When we saw them in Ocarina of Time, the previous game, they just seemed to burrow around the land and live in small groups, whereas here, they have essentially their own miniature kingdom deep within Woodfall. Not too far from the palace, back in the southern swamp, we can also find the entrance to the Woods of Mystery. Mysteriously mysterious woods that are a mystery. I'll get the obvious out of the way. These woods are another version of the Lost Woods seen in Ocarina of Time, a magical maze with 4 directions to head in, but if you take a wrong turn, you'll become lost and end up right where you started. Fun fact, in the French version of Majora's Mask, they're actually just called the Lost Woods. Now, unlike the Lost Woods previously seen in a deep forest in Ocarina of Time, the Woods of Mystery take on a more tropical woodland look. Our reason for entering is part of the questline to take the swamp boat tour run by Kyume, but first Link must rescue her as she was attacked by the Skull Kid. He follows a monkey through the woods in order to not get lost. They're a fun wee part of this region, but in terms of lore and mysteries, I have some questions. Thinking in terms of the in-game Zelda universe, what exactly are these woods? At this point, we've seen 2 near identical woodlands with the same magical properties in Travelers Becoming Lost with Ease, and laid out the exact same way. Why is that? And where exactly is this enchantment coming from? In Ocarina of Time, it's easily explained as the work of the Great Deku Tree to protect the Kokiri. However, in Majora's Mask, there isn't an obvious answer. We could look to the Deku King perhaps and suggest he maybe has magic put over this area to further protect his people and avoid outsiders coming in. You could also argue that it's the work of Kotake and Kyume, as whilst not obvious witches in this game, they were in the last, but neither are super strong suggestions nor have much backing them. One other suggestion could be that it's the work of Adolwa, the god of Woodfall and boss to the temple found in this region. Adolwa is a tribal warrior and considered the god of this region, so if anyone is capable of this kind of magic, then maybe it was him. I obviously can't say that for sure, but it's my best idea to answer this insanely overthought question, the life of a Zelda lore enthusiast. Now, whilst we're on the topic of Adolwa, I can't not mention the mighty Woodfall Temple. I've said before that in this series I try to avoid covering dungeons as dungeons, but when their lore is interesting, I can't say no. However, if you are interested in videos about dungeons as dungeons, then definitely check out my good friend Kat Bergeson's videos. He goes over Zelda dungeons and they are some of the best Zelda videos on YouTube. It's found in this large area of the swamp. At first, it's not even here. In order to access the ancient temple, Link must play the Sonata of Awakening, a song he learned from the monkey trapped in the Deku Palace. This will erect the temple from deep within the swamp. A proper old school temple covered in foliage, debris, and a wee bit of poisonous water. On the inside, it's quite something. Beautiful ancient architecture like nothing we've seen in the series. A focus on bugs and insects such as butterflies and beetles. Mysterious markings on the floors and walls, as well as a layout not really designed for Hylians like Link. It appears to be made for the Deku to traverse with ease, so it's some sort of ancient Deku temple by the looks of things. But where this gets even more interesting in terms of lore is the boss room. In here, we find more markings on the ground, but most intriguingly of all is this pair of statues. What and or who are they? Is this 2 individuals or 2 of the same individual? They appear alien-like with their large eyes and facial structure. Could they perhaps be the same as Adolwa? Possibly in worship to him and or a partner. Maybe in ancient times the Deku came here to worship their god, the god of Woodfall. It certainly seems that's what the Woodfall Temple was for at some point in time. The statues being Adolwa and or a partner would also make a lot of sense as to why he's found in this main room. Maybe back in the day, this was some sort of throne room for the masked jungle warrior. In the north of Termina, we can find the chilly Snowhead region, a dense sub-zero snowy mountain, home of the Gorons and very few in between. I'll be honest, it's not my favourite region in this game, which is odd because I normally love areas like this, but I just don't in Majora's Mask. But alas, there are still points of interest within this mountain range to look at, and where better to start than the home of the Gorons. Goron Village. Not the most insanely lore-heavy place, but worth going over the Goron culture and lifestyle. Due to the overly frozen climate of the mountains right now, most of the Gorons can be found inside the Goron Shrine, the main building in the centre of the village. Inside here is best described as hell. That is because the Goron Elder's son is crying without stop. That is until Link shows up and plays the Goron lullaby, soothing the soul of the wee man. The shrine itself shows us that Goron culture is just as strong as it was in Ocarina of Time. Very tribal, painted, carved and designed for one big family of brothers. On the outside there is a fairly lore heavy location floating just across from the shrine. This is the Lone Peak Shrine. A suspended cave that can only be accessed via the invisible platforms. But what's interesting is the contents inside. In here, Link can find the magical Sheikah artifact, the Lens of Truth. A magnifying glass-like lens that reveals what cannot be seen to the naked eye. This item first appeared in Ocarina of Time, a creation of the Sheikah. But why exactly is it found up here in the home of the Gorons? The Sheikah aren't exactly present in Termina. It's not really explained as to why the Gorons have it, but it does end up coming in handy, as it's used in order to see the deceased Darmani III, a now past Goron who Link helps rest in peace. All whilst gaining the Goron mask required to progress to the dungeon of this area. Speaking of which, Snowhead Temple. As mentioned, I don't tend to focus much on the dungeons as dungeons in this series, but it's definitely worth mentioning as it's quite the stunning spectacle to look at. The other location of interest to me up here is the Mountain Village, for two reasons. Firstly, this home right here. Inside we can find the mountain smithy duo, Gabora and Zabora, a pair of blacksmiths who can upgrade and sharpen Link's swords, creating new, more powerful swords for the hero to use. But even more interesting in this village is the Goron Graveyard. Found atop a high cliff looking over the wee village, this is the resting place of the Gorons, and where Link goes with the spirit of Darmani III to help him rest in peace. It's a sort of sandy room with these large purple, crystal-like, presumably tombstones. It's not crazy insane lore, but we do get a cool insight to what a Goron grave looks like for someone who is considered a Goron hero. Rest in peace, Darmani III. Off to the west of Termina is the Great Bay region, a coastal shoreline that would depress even the happiest of happy mass salesmen. It's grey, grim and quiet. Link first enters the beach area only to find a dying Zora in the water, Mikau, the guitarist of the Zora band, the Indie-Go-Go's. Link helps him rest in peace and in return gains a new mask. In terms of location lore, there isn't tons on the actual coastline if you ask me. However, the area is stunning in the gritty nature of this game, from the waterfall rapids to the Zora Cape. It's beautiful. I'd also like to give special mention to the Fisherman's Hut, who has this poster of a Gerudo pirate. He gets it. The first location of particular interest for me is the Zora Hall. Like with the Gorons, the Zora Hall gives us a cool look at Zora life in this adventure. A seaside-based group, which is interesting as it shows us that the Zora can thrive in both fresh water, as seen in Ocarina of Time, but also salt water. The Zora Hall is a large cave system full of waterfalls and pools, large decorative shells, and arguably one of the coolest Zora's domains in the series. Their culture appears to be stronger than ever, even having a famous band, despite the guitarist having recently passed away. But in the homeland of the Zora, the most lore-heavy location that piques my interest is actually of Gerudo origins. The Pirate Fortress is a large metal-made stronghold home to the Gerudo pirates. They've changed a fair bit from the last game they appeared in Ocarina of Time, where they were warriors out in the desert. As Termina doesn't have a desert, the Gerudo have become pirates. This daunting fortress is massive, fit with two large spike-topped entrances, a watchtower, skull flags, pirate sword symbols, and Gerudo pirate baddies, warriors. Gerudo pirate warriors all over the place who are very well trained in combat. Link enters this place to recover stolen Zora eggs, but has to be very careful as well as go head to head with a few of these pirates. Fit with jewel blades, they are tough opponents, but the hero is successful. This place is insanely awesome, and whilst not directly connected in lore to the Forsaken Fortress seen in the Wind Waker, it does share some of the same symbolism, which is cool because this place is actually the same as the Gerudo Fortress seen in Ocarina of Time. The Gerudo becoming pirates happened in more than one timeline split. The dungeon of this area, the Great Bay Temple, is interesting. It's accessed via a giant turtle, due to a curse on the area, but once in, we discovered that it's actually a factory of some sort, showing us that in some ways Termina is more advanced than Hyrule, which is some really cool lore if you ask me. It's not quite clearly exactly what the facility does, but it's obviously something with water, perhaps filtration or energy, or fishing or something, I don't know. It's a cool fact that sometimes flies under the radar when talking about this location. Now for, in my opinion, the most Majora's Mask location in Majora's Mask. The Akana region, home to an ancient castle and lost kingdom, dark secrets beneath the graves, and a stone tower with a challenge for the hero. The ancient castle of Akana is now a derelict hollow shell of what once was a mighty kingdom, now filled with undead enemies such as Redeads and Wallmasters, additionally patrolled by the Gero, who, whilst trying to kill Link, also provide him with interesting information about the fallen kingdom and castle upon defeat. It is sort of a dungeon in itself, but also a history lesson for the lost kingdom and people of Akana, and we even meet the former king, King Aigos du Akana, and his two minions in the throne room. This is where Link is taught the Elegy of Emptiness, which is required to progress inside the stone tower, which is also where the king pushes Link in the direction of. The Stone Tower dungeon is made up of 3 buildings, and sort of moves around in complex ways. Link needs the Elegy of Emptiness in order to traverse it. We don't quite know exactly why this was built, but we do learn that it holds back some sort of evil. In the words of the king, the winds of darkness blow through, and Link must close the door. Perhaps it was some sort of sacred shrine to wear off evil on their land, but that is a purely speculative guess. Akana Village and Graveyard are also quite interesting. This was once a home for many. One home in particular that's worth looking at is the Music Box House. It has a large phonogram atop to blast music to wear off Gibdos, an odd but yet really smart solution. There's even a really fun questline involving this house and Pamela, along with her father. As for the notable graveyard, we can meet a familiar face here, Dampé. Once again the Gravekeeper and Digger. Alongside him, we can even venture down into the graves with the help of some stall children and explore the lost remains beneath the graveyard, including the grave of Flat, one of 2 composer brothers. This former kingdom once had soldiers for days, a captain at the top of the ranks, and an entire monarchy system all within the valley. Lost kingdoms are fascinating to explore, and Akana is one of the coolest in my opinion. It's a shame we don't see it in its prime, despite things looking a bit better after completing the stone tower, but at the same time, it's not knowing what they truly looked like in their prime that makes lost ancient kingdoms like this, of the past, so interesting. Off to the southwest of Clocktown, we can find Romani Ranch, the home of the famous Chateau Romani milk, owned by Cremia, who lives here with her sister Romani. Prior to the events of the game, the father of the sisters passed away, but he left the ranch to them, with its special Romani bred cows that produce the special Chateau Romani milk. I didn't know why I said it like that. Famously known and enjoyed across Termina. There's a wee bit of beef between Romani Ranch and the Gorman brothers and their ranch. Part of the game is helping out with these issues, which are really just the brothers being giant heads. Now, the really fascinating and genuinely mysterious lore of this ranch occurs at night. Romani tells Link that she's been practicing for the arrival of the ghost-like creatures that come to the ranch, and steal cows every year when the Carnival of Time approaches. Cremia doesn't believe her, but Link can find out for himself by staying as night falls and witness one of the Zelda series' biggest mysteries. At 2:30 in the morning, they arrive. Strange alien ghost creatures, and throughout the course of the night, Link must fight alongside Romani to protect the ranch. But in terms of lore, what on earth are they? There has been a real-world mystery connection, as they strike a strong resemblance to the Flatwoods monster, a West Virginian folklore creature. But what exactly do they want with Romani Ranch and the cows? Well, they appear to be depicted as abductors, extraterrestrial creatures from another world. Perhaps they want the cows to research or test on them. Or maybe, just maybe, they want some of that sweet Chateau Romani. It's like many real-world mysteries. Few are said to have actually seen them. Not many truly believe they're real, but as for those who have claimed to have seen them, in this case, have actually seen them, it's a very real and puzzling mystery of Romani Ranch. Let's take this back to the true beginning of Majora's Mask. Not in Clocktown, but rather the Lost Woods. This game opens with Link leaving the Kingdom of Hyrule, set on a personal quest to find Navi, who left him at the end of Ocarina of Time. In the Lost Woods, he is attacked by the Skull Kid, seen wearing Majora's Mask. He steals Epona from Link and a chase begins. This leads Link to hop up on these mushrooms and head into an entrance to a large tree. It leads him to a high edge, and in a moment of lost composure, Link falls down, and this is exactly where every debate about what this game really is begins. This entire fall is heavily debated as to the true canon lore. Is this Link dying? Is this Link teleporting to another realm? Or is this all purely symbolic? There just isn't a clear answer. All we truly know is that the entrance to Termina is found somewhere deep within the already mysterious and magical Lost Woods, an already existing location seen in Ocarina of Time, slightly expanded in how it's traversed is seen right here. Perhaps that fact points this in the direction of a parallel realm or world, which would also add up with why there are so many familiar faces, in terms of in-game lore anyway. But the truth is, the lore here is a mystery. As the game comes towards the final boss battle against Majora, Link and Tatl must venture to the moon, the threat that has been looming high above for this entire adventure. But it's not as you'd expect. It's not how it looks from below, rather it's a different realm almost. Upon following Majora's Mask after discarding the Skull Kid's body, Link and Tatl are transported to this luscious grassy field with a lone tree atop a slight hill, known as the Grassy Playfield. We can find the Moon Children, 4 youngsters wearing the remains of the game's 4 bosses in the form of masks. They say interesting things, deep questions to test your mentality. Stuff like, the right thing, what is it? I wonder, if you do the right thing, does it make everybody happy? Or, your friends, what kind of people are they? I wonder, do these people think of you as a friend? It makes you wonder just who these children are, and why they're asking these questions. If Link speaks to and hands over his masks, they'll transport him to special dungeons. If Link trades all 20 non-transformation masks, he'll even be able to gain the Fierce Deity mask for the final boss battle. Speaking of which, there is a 5th child sitting by the tree, wearing Majora's Mask. In an oddly calm manner, speaking to this child kicks off the final boss battle. But what exactly is up with the moon? Why are we taken to this grassy plain? Well, when Majora's Mask left the Skull Kid for dead, its possession over the imp wasn't just for the sake of it. Majora then went on to possess the moon and ensure it continues to crash down towards Termina, overpowering the 4 giants holding it back. So it could be described that this is a vision or creation of Majora, a peaceful playing field, but at the heart of destruction. But another way to look at this in terms of the lore is this location is to take the view of the heavily debated theory that this game is either not real or a process of Link's death. That famous game theory which, whether you're for or against, it's a massive talking point. And whilst I don't personally believe this game is showing us the stages of grief and Link having died after falling down the tree, but I admit there are a lot of valid points to it, as well as the idea of this being a dream of sorts, which is something we've seen before in the Zelda series. Spoiler alert for a game released in 1993. Link's Awakening turns out to all be one big dream. So it's a valid thought to discuss. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that perhaps this final chapter of the game really shows us that it's a dream. I mean, a grassy plain inside the moon? That sounds like something ripped straight out of Random Dreams. This could all even link to why the Moon Children ask such deep questions. Like the majority of questions in this game, there is no solid answer. But between these two, I reckon it's more than likely a creation of Majora, but as to why, I cannot say. And for an even weirder and more unexplainable detail, the character model for the child wearing Majora's mask is none other than the Happy Mask Salesman. Following the final boss battle, the moon itself disintegrates, and this final famous location of the video no longer exists. Kicking off this list of locations, we start our journey at the landmark of the kingdom, Hyrule Castle, a stunning Gothic-style castle in this game, which has been taken over by the infectious Twilight. This is the largest and most explorable content-filled version of the castle to date. It's visible from almost anywhere in Hyrule, and is genuinely a massive spectacle to take in. Towering over Castletown in its full glory, this home for the Hyrulean royal family has large gardens surrounding it, a graveyard, prisons, sewers, and many rooms inside, including the Grand Throne Room seen multiple times throughout the game. Prior to the events of the game taking place, Hyrule Castle was invaded by the evil and corrupt King Zan of the Twilight, accompanied by his terrifying shadow beasts. This attack on the castle was brutal. Princess Zelda alongside the Knights of Hyrule were pinned back to the throne room, the rest of her family nowhere to be seen and presumably dead at this point. Zan left Zelda with no choice but to surrender the kingdom of Hyrule, and accept its fate to be engulfed by the Twilight. This is where he first meets Midna, our companion for this adventure. She helps Link escape his shackles and venture up from the depths of Hyrule Castle's prisons and sewers all the way to the rooftops leading to Princess Zelda's room where she is being kept prisoner. This part of the game gives us a stunning, gloomy look at the castle from high above. It's sights like this which make this my favourite video game. We get such an amazing look at the castle from so many different angles, all whilst infected by the Twilight and the unique enemies it brings on. This leads us to Princess Zelda's bedroom in one of the high towers, a gothic and gritty room with a lit fireplace. It's honestly quite beautiful if you forget the part about surrendering your kingdom and being kept prisoner. This is where she is kept captive whilst the castle is under Twilight control. We also return later in the story during Midna's desperate hour, in which Princess Zelda saves Midna in her bedroom by lending her power, eventually leading to the castle being trapped within this golden Twilight magic dome, later broken by Midna using the full fuse shadow. But coolest of all, unlike most Zelda games, we actually get to fully explore the insides of the castle, or more or less the entirety of inside. This is because the final dungeon of the game is Hyrule Castle. In order to reach Ganondorf to face off in a 4-stage battle of the ages, Link must first venture through Hyrule Castle. The main room is this massive dome. It's huge. We explore the long corridors, mysterious rooms, and battle off against enemies such as Darknuts lurking in the castle. This eventually leads us to the previously seen throne room in which Zelda surrendered. When we arrive, we're met by Ganondorf sitting on the throne, kicking off the first phase of the final battle against Puppet Zelda, then Beast Ganon, and then we leave the castle to face off in Hyrule Field. But the lore of the castle is about to change big time. In a moment of madness, Ganondorf uses his dark magic to rumble the castle into what seems like complete destruction. However, we do see the throne room again during the credits, so perhaps it was restored after the defeat of Ganondorf, but he's certainly done some damage here. This Hyrule Castle is heavily involved throughout the game's story, and builds a ton of cool lore and backstory because of this. I love that we go back multiple times, in different settings and for different reasons, each time seeing a little bit more of the castle, until the final visit where we get to fully explore the castle. And one more additional interesting bit of lore to add is these mysterious murals that can be found around the castle on the walls. It depicts the Triforce, Oka, and various figures from around Hyrule. It's been a bit of a mystery as to what this is depicting, which makes this location all the more interesting. Hyrule Castle has been through a lot in this game, and the lore it built is truly fascinating. Our next location takes us to the Lanayru province, where we can find the stunning Great Bridge of Hylia, a truly magnificent piece of architectural work that sits high above Lake Hylia. There isn't a ton of deep lore, but considering how famous and iconic this location is, it'd be wrong not to delve into its story. Our first encounter with this bridge comes in wolf form, as Link searches for the Tears of Light in this area, only he becomes trapped atop the bridge by shadow blins. They set a fire on either side of the beast form hero, closing in on him rapidly, which forces the hero to jump off the Great Bridge down into the depths of Lake Hylia. A daunting dive, but the only option. Our next encounter in the story comes a little later on during the infamous escort mission, where Link needs to help bring the ill Prince Rallis to Kakariko village, protecting the carriage with Telma and Ilia on board as well. The Bridge of Eldin is damaged, forcing them to take this longer route round and over the Great Bridge of Hylia. However, the big King Bulblin is blocking the path across the bridge, forcing Link to battle him once again. This epic joust is a thrilling fight, which ends with Link charging King Bulblin and striking him right off the edge down into the depths of Lake Hylia, coming full circle to the King's minions, forcing Link off the edge earlier in the story. The bridge doesn't have much more story involvement, but it's a commonly used route to get around Hyrule, and the spectacle never gets old. The Bridge of Hylia seen in the two Wild Era games takes on a very similar design, just on a larger scale to fit that world, and it appears to be inspired and/or referencing this bridge in Twilight Princess. We don't know how or when the support pillars began to crumble, but the bridge still seems to hold up pretty well, and its story in Twilight Princess is something I find quite interesting. Moving up north to the Peak province, the Snow Peak Mountains are a rather interesting and famous location in Hyrule, a snow-covered region of high peaks and mountains. We first enter this region during the search for the Mirror Shards, only accessible via this small tunnel by Zora's domain, and we're met by Ashi upon first entering the Snow Peak Mountains. Ashi, a member of the Resistance group, explains that Link must first track down a beast seen stealing reek fish from Zora's domain, setting up a little quest to catch one and pick up its scent to track its way up the snowy mountains. The entire area is harsh, cold and tough to scale. Deep snow fills the hills. Sharp winds whip the snow into your face, and the elevation climb is tricky to maneuver up. The full extent of the range appears to go quite far, however we as the player can only explore a set path up to the peak. We learn that there's also caves within the mountains, so perhaps there's actually quite a lot throughout the entire range, with who knows what inside them. At the peak, we can meet the only two known inhabitants of the mountains, Yetta and Yeto, a Yeti couple who live down in the Snow Peak Mansion ruins, the 5th dungeon in the game. The existence of Yetta and Yeto means that there could possibly be more Yetis out there elsewhere in the mountains. We know that Ashi grew up somewhere within the mountains as well, as she tells us inside Telma's bar that she grew up out here with her Night Father, which leads us to a little more lore of the mountains. Once reaching the top of the mountains, we can head back down the other side and discover the Snow Peak Mansion, a now ruined and abandoned home, formerly with some association to Hyrule and some form of military. Yetta and Yeto currently live in the ruined mansion, and it serves as the game's 5th dungeon as previously mentioned, and there's a whole questline revolving them in the dungeon. There's a mystery, however, about what this mansion once was. We find lots of different military gear, from weapons, shields and armor sets to cannons all over the place, and at that, not all of the armor sets appear to be Hylian fit. It has some sort of significant connection to Hyrule, and likely the royal family, as we find this crest inside, as well as some very significant looking paintings depicting key figures from the series. But it remains a mystery hiding deep within the Snow Peak Mountains. I did a video quite a while ago going over my thoughts on what it is if you want to check it out. The mountains in general are a bit mysterious in terms of how little we know, and how much more could be out there. Did Ashi stay at the Snow Peak Mansion with her father, or did she live somewhere else in the mountain range? We have a decent amount of lore already, but there could honestly be a lot more out here. Hiding in Hyrule, we can find the Hidden Village, also known as the Bygone Village. a now abandoned and boblin-infested settlement in the Eldin province. Prior to the events of Twilight Princess, it's said that the hidden village was a secret home for the Sheikah tribe. However, due to war, it fell into its current condition over time. For a while in Link's adventure, the entrance to the village is blocked off, but through the main quest line involving Ilia and recovering her memory, Link gains access to the hidden village in order to find Impaz, the only person inhabiting the village these days. But she's trapped. Link needs to clear out the village from all boblin threats. In doing so, he can also meet a ton of cats. Impaz has a lot of cats. A lot. Interesting detail, her name Impaz is a clear reference to Impa, a significant name in the Sheikah, as this is the name given to the other very significant Sheikah members throughout the series. Perhaps Impaz was once known as Impa back in the day, or maybe she's related to Impa. It's not entirely clear, but a very interesting detail to mention. Something else that's very interesting about this place is that the old sign on one of the buildings actually translates to "Welcome to Old Kakariko." In terms of lore, this is very significant, possibly hinting back to the Kakariko village seen in Ocarina of Time, a game which took place around 100 years prior to this one. But that about sums up all we know about the hidden village: old and abandoned, connections to the Sheikah of the past, and cats. Lots of cats. Moving to a rather unique location that isn't found in Hyrule itself, rather high above in the sky. The city in the sky is the 7th dungeon in the game, but the city itself, taking away the fact it's a dungeon, is packed with lore and mysteries. Home to the highly advanced Oka tribe, this insanely technologically advanced settlement that stays afloat in the sky is believed to have prospered thanks to the highly advanced technology of the Oka. We can find inside many unique mechanisms, large fans, interesting details, and complex inner workings, which all play a part in how this city operates. Link finds this place under the possession of a terrifying dragon that soars around the place, breaking pieces down as it claims the ancient city as its own. We gain access to the city via the Sky Cannon found below Kakariko village and repaired at Lake Hylia. It's a work of the Oka, with the purpose of sending the messenger who holds the Dominion Rod, found inside the Temple of Time. They'd go inside and shoot up to the city in the sky. Inside the shop up in the city, we can actually find miniature models of the Sky Cannon, perhaps indicating that it's a well-known piece of work of the Oka. Shad, a Hylian researcher, tells Link, when they created the people of Hylia, they simultaneously created a new capital, a city that floated in the heavens, as well as that some scholars believe the Oka race still lived there, somewhere in the great sky. Shad's knowledge of the Oka and City in the Sky indicate to us that all of this isn't very common knowledge to the average Hylian. It's also a cool dungeon in my opinion. The music can become a little annoying, but the mini-boss and boss are some of my favourites in the series, though we're not here to talk through the dungeon itself. The lore of the City in the Sky is very significant to Hyrule. The relationship between the Oka and Hyrule has played a big role in history, with the Messenger of the Heavens, and on the previously mentioned murals at Hyrule Castle, we see the Oka depicted. They are a part of Hyrule's history, but live up here in their highly advanced floating city. It's a bit of a mystery as to why they want to stay so disconnected, but that's what makes this interesting. Moving back down to the surface of Hyrule, in the upper Zora's River area, we find Henna's Fishing Hole, one of the most beautiful and scenic locations in the entirety of the Zelda series. I cannot express just how many hours I've spent here alone just taking in the view, soaking in the music, and spending a little time away from the adventure to just go fishing. For context, I love fishing in real life, and discovering the existence of this place in Twilight Princess lit up my eyes. You can fish on your own with the standard fishing pole, but also go fishing with Henna and use a proper rod and reel, which is just so awesome to do in a Zelda game. There isn't a ton of deep lore to the fishing hole, however, it is a very famous and big fan favourite due to its beautiful setting and infamous minigame. Inside Henna's hut, we can play the notoriously frustrating roll goal game, which was made especially difficult at times when using including the Wii Remote and Nunchuck, as you try to roll the little marble to the end goal. Some cool lore behind Henna herself is that she appears to be related to the famous fisherman from Ocarina of Time, a game set around 100 years prior to the events of Twilight Princess. Fishing runs in her family, which we can see in the pictures of herself and her siblings fishing on the wall. She's carrying that legacy on, which I absolutely love. The seasons of the fishing hole changes whenever Link enters, which is more than just an aesthetic feature, as this is the only way to catch the famous Hylian loach, which can only be caught during the summertime. Sinking lures are a big no-no here, as Henna believes them to be cheating and harmful to the fish and environment. I'd be lying if I said that including this location wasn't partially because of my bias towards fishing in Zelda games, particularly this game, but at the same time, Henna's fishing hole is a pretty famous location, and worth mentioning. Now for a location very true to the name of this game, the Twilight Realm. This location is like no other we've seen across the Zelda series, a parallel dimension of darkness, shroud in complete shadow opposing the light of Hyrule. We find the Palace of Twilight upon entering the Twilight Realm through the Mirror of Twilight. This royal palace is a very unique structure. It has this mysterious blue twilight energy running through it. Powering the unique technology inside and seemingly running the entire location. The people of the Twilight Realm are known as the Twili, descendants of the ancient interlopers who once tried to steal the Triforce for their own greed, even breaking into the Sacred Realm. A group of evil Hylians banished to the Twilight Realm, and over the many years, they adapted to the conditions of this realm, and we are now met with the Twilight race. The entire history of the Twilight Realm is unknown. We learn these brief bits of information throughout the game, but unlike the Kingdom of Hyrule, we just don't learn much about this place. Recent history, however, we learn that prior to the events of this game, Midna was the true ruler of the Twilight Realm. However, a new entrant to the realm would toss that rule into chaos. A long while before the events of Twilight Princess, Ganondorf, the King of Evil, was sentenced to execution, but it failed. In a moment of panic, at the Arbiter's grounds in the Mirror Chamber, the sages banished him to the Twilight Realm to prevent him causing any further harm to Hyrule, having just murdered one of the sages in an attempt to break free. During his time in the shadow planes of the Twilight Realm, he managed to influence and turn the government into chaos, overthrowing Midna with the help of his puppet ruler, Zant, who would turn this place into an evil realm, locking away the souls, creating a true darkness which would morph the looks of the Twilight, as well as cast them in shadow. Following this, Zant and the Twilight would then go and invade Hyrule, which happens around the time of our adventure kicking off with Link. When we as the player enter the Twilight Realm, we're there to take out Zant, and after recovering the souls and making our way through the palace, we face off with the false King of Twilight, ending with Midna blowing him up like a balloon, and thus the false king is dead. This entire place could go much deeper than we can explore. Out in the distance, you can see more islands floating in the darkness. What's to say there aren't more larger islands somewhere out there? We saw concept art of a Twilight town, somewhere separate, presumable to the palace, fit with homes and more Twilight people, but we don't see it appear in game. Perhaps in terms of the in-game lore, this town and more do exist, just far into the shadows. Unfortunately, the only known method to enter this realm is broken. The Mirror of Twilight was shattered by Midna at the very end of the game. As she enters the realm, she also breaks the entrance. So we don't really know what's going on within the Twilight Realm now, but we can assume that Midna has returned to her true leader of the Twilight Realm status, the Twilight Princess. Looking just below the place where we find the Mirror of Twilight, our next famous location is the fourth dungeon of this game, the Arbiter's Grounds. But my oh my, is it so much more than just a dungeon. The Arbiter's Grounds was previously a prison, isolated far out in the Gerudo Desert, only accessible via a large cannon, reserved for the absolute worst criminals awaiting trial, execution, or banishment to the Twilight Realm. This is exactly where Ganondorf was taken for his previous crimes. We see this event take place as a cutscene. The King of Evil was chained to the stone. The sages were ready to execute him, but in what's referred to as the Divine Prank, Ganondorf's power and strength from within grew impossibly strong, so much so that he could take the Sword of Six Sages through his body, break free from his shackles, and lunge to murder one of the sages. This caused the other sages to be forced to send Ganondorf to the Twilight Realm to avoid any further chaos, and that was the end of Ganondorf for the time being, eventually leading to the events that create this entire story. On the inside, it's rather broken down and dangerous now. It has tomb-like vibes as we explore inside. Sinking sand covers a lot of rooms, crumbling stone and crawling with enemies. But on the outside, it looks more like a coliseum. Speaking of all of this, the enemies within here take us to one of the coolest mini-bosses in the entire series, Death's Sword, a trapped spiritual foe, tied down by talisman that once cut, the spirit is released. This shows us the caliber of evil that was kept in this former prison, only this one still remains. There is also the main boss, Stallord, a giant reanimated beast found in this large chamber. As to what Stallord was before dying and becoming nothing more than bones, I'm not sure we'd want to know. Perhaps a large dragon similar to Argarok, or maybe something else equally as terrifying to face off against. This dungeon is a prime example of the insanely cool lore behind even the dungeons in Twilight Princess, with the Arbiter's Grounds being one of the most loved, lore-heavy, and famous places in Hyrule. Before getting into the final famous location for the video, here are a few honourable mentions I'd like to highlight, as I've not included them for full segments, but still want to include them in some way. The Bridge of Eldin, Agatha's Castle, the Cave of Ordeals, the Lakebed Temple, the Goron Hot Springs, and Ordon Ranch. The final famous location we'll be visiting today can be found in the Faron province. The Sacred Grove is an extremely significant location in this game. Hidden deep within Faron, not far from the Forest Temple, we first come here in order to break the curse placed upon Link, as Princess Zelda informs us that the only way to do so is by finding the Master Sword, the Blade of Evil's Bane hidden deep within the Sacred Grove. In order to enter, Link must first hubble Zelda's lullaby as Wolfling in order to summon Skull Kid, who will begin to open up new pathways through the forest, forcing Link to chase him, whilst having to avoid his puppets. It's a bit of a game, but nothing a hero can't handle. After finding Skull Kid 3 times, a new area opens up surrounded by ancient ruins. If Link strikes the Skull Kid 3 times, he'll vanish and open up the passage to the grounds of the now ruined Temple of Time. As to why the Temple of Time is now found this far out in the middle of nowhere, when it's normally found in Castletown, or just a lot more central in general, is a mystery in itself. Before gaining access to the Master Sword, sealed behind these ancient doors, the hero must first figure out this extremely frustrating at the best of times puzzle, moving 2 guardian statues around until aligned perfectly to open the door. Once open, Link can enter and gain access to the mighty Master Sword, breaking the curse Sant plagued upon him and gaining the Master Sword to bring on the rest of his adventure. We next visit the Sacred Grove to take on the game's 6th dungeon, the Temple of Time. Despite appearing in ruins, in order to enter this dungeon, Link must plant the Master Sword back into its pedestal in order to remove another guardian blocking this door nearby. Through this door takes the hero to the Temple of Time, restored and in full glory, but that's about all we get in terms of story-required exploration in the Sacred Grove. Obviously, we enter the Temple of Time, but it's not really the Sacred Grove at that point. It's one of the most significant locations in the game in terms of lore, being home to the Master Sword and Temple of Time, but also both begging questions of why they're out here in Faron, when in pretty much every other game, we find them a lot more central. But then again, in A Link to the Past, we also find the Master Sword out in the woods, so it's another confusing mystery to add to the hundreds and thousands of mysteries in the Zelda series. During the game's credits, we see the Resistance group exploring the Sacred Grove, so it's pretty cool to know that other people outside of Link have managed to get out here. But other than that, that's about all the lore behind this famous location of Hyrule. Starting off at the heart of the kingdom, or rather, the former heart of the kingdom, Hyrule Castle. Found deep below the Great Sea, a land forgotten in time, washed beneath the waves. A bit of important backstory for not just this opening location, but the entire video, is that the Wind Waker setting takes place at sea. This is because the game is the beginning of the adult timeline split. The branch in which the events at the end of Ocarina of Time were the gods flooding Hyrule in order to stop Ganondorf from taking over, and ultimately destroying the kingdom. In the desperate hours, the people of Hyrule fled to the mountaintops, now seen as islands, as the rest was submerged beneath the Great Flood orchestrated by the gods. However, Hyrule Castle was protected by a magical seal, stopping the flood from destroying the castle and important relics inside. It also froze the castle in time. When Link first gets down to the castle following the Tower of the Gods, he finds it still frozen. Monsters that were a part of Ganondorf's attack before the Great Flood, frozen in time. Moblins and Darknuts menacingly waiting to strike. This alone tells us how brutal the attack was. These two enemies are large brutes. They'd wipe out soldiers with ease, and the place is crawling with them. Link ventures down here in order to retrieve the Master Sword, which can be found in a chamber down below the castle, sealed over with a statue of the Hero of Time. In the chamber itself, we can see stained glass on the walls depicting the sages seen in Ocarina of Time, a nod to the Sacred Realm as well, where we see the sages in a circle much like this. Once Link retrieves the Blade of Evil's Bane required to take out Ganondorf, something interesting happens. The freeze on time defrosts. The magical seal protecting the castle from water remains intact, however, all of those Darknuts and Moblins are free, and Link must fight his way out of the castle with his new sword. It's also down here a little later on in the story that Tetra discovers her true identity, Princess Zelda, and she decides to stay down here whilst Link seeks out the Triforce of Courage. But this would turn out to be a bad decision. When Link eventually returns to the castle, Tetra has been kidnapped by Ganondorf and taken to his tower over the hills from Hyrule Castle. I'm a big fan of how, despite the fact the castle is deep below the sea, it's still decently involved in the game's story beyond just one visit for the Master Sword. It's also just a really cool version of Hyrule Castle, taking on a very fitting, cartoonish design to match the Wind Waker's art style, while still capturing the epic medieval style castle vibes. The inside contains loads of really cool details and bits of lore, such as the paintings on the wall depicting the King of Hyrule, and this one with Princess Zelda and presumably other members of the royal family. A really interesting detail to see here is that everyone in the photo around Zelda strongly resembles the pirate crew on Tetra's ship. Perhaps like Tetra being Zelda, the pirate crew are also one of the same, but just don't know it. Overall, Hyrule Castle in this game isn't massively involved, and understandably so as it's deep below the waves, but the ways in which it is involved are extremely cool and really help piece the lore and backstory of this game all together. Far in the northwest corner of the Great Sea, in the darkness of an eternal night, we can find the Forsaken Fortress. A dark stone sea fort, crawling with monsters patrolling the inside and out, searchlights scanning the place, and these big boys sniffing your feet. The Forsaken Fortress is trapped in a constant state of darkness. Regardless of the time of day, as soon as Link sails into the vicinity, the skies will rapidly turn dark. Link first visits the fortress early on in the game after leaving his home island in search for his sister. Tagging along with a pirate crew, they are led to believe his sister might be out here. In one of the series' most funny scenes, Link is catapulted into the fortress inside a barrel, the only way to enter whilst avoiding the lookouts. However, he loses his sword in doing so, and is forced into a stealth mission to get around. After sneaking his way to the top, he finds his sister in a jail cell. However, before he can free her and the other girls trapped here, a massive bird known as King Helmarok grabs him, bringing him to this mysterious man in a shipwrecked room high above, with a decision being made to toss the hero out into the darkness of the nighttime sea. So what is this fortress that the young hero bravely entered so early on in his adventure? Well, it's where the game's main antagonist Ganondorf has been residing, the King of Evil. He's using the fortress as a hub to try and find Princess Zelda. This is actually why Link's younger sister Hyrule ended up here, as Ganondorf sent the Helmarok King out to find young girls that could be Princess Zelda. Thus far it has failed and would continue to, as previously mentioned. Tetra is Princess Zelda, but her true identity is protected and even hidden from herself for a large part of the game. Now, the lore of the fortress goes deeper than just this being Ganondorf's hideaway of sorts. The Forsaken Fortress was formerly a hideout for a group of no-good pirates, as said by Tetra. However, that extends just a bit deeper, as through the Hyrule Encyclopedia book, we learn that the Forsaken Fortress is actually the very same as the Gerudo Fortress seen in Ocarina of Time, the game which this timeline split originates from. We're even shown a comparison map of original locations prior to the Great Flood, and what survived as mountain peaks, now islands in the Great Sea. I made a video all about this location a few years back if you're interested in checking it out later, but to recap the key details, yes, this fortress is the very same as that seen in Ocarina of Time, according to the information provided. The canonicity of these books is questioned by some, but I personally choose to believe the large majority of it, or at least believe it, but take some specifics with a grain of salt. It's not worth the headache of overthinking, right? We can see just how well it matches up by having a look around too. Obviously it's not one for one in design, as first and foremost this is a different game, but also just due to the fact it would have had to adapt to the new setting of the world, going from desert to sea. A very drastic change, and probably a large part of why the Gerudo that once occupied here were considered pirates. In fact, in Majora's Mask, the Gerudo are pirates, but that is a different timeline split. Just a point worth mentioning that it also happened over in that timeline. Across the fortress, we can find little subtle nods and references to its origins, from the designs of the pots to the subtle blade designs carved into the stone, referencing the dual blades used by the Gerudo in Ocarina of Time, but also the insides in general. We find several holding cells across the place, exactly how it was back in Ocarina of Time, not all in the one place, rather dotted around. There's also the fact that Ganondorf chose to set up here. Being a Gerudo himself, it all adds up. Link comes back later on in the story after getting the Master Sword, this time being successful in rescuing his sister, but only after fighting through Phantom Ganon and the Helmarok King, this time not needing to sneak around as he has his sword and shield. He can also return again even later and see the fortress no longer in darkness, nor packed with enemies. This happens after Vulu attacks Ganondorf, so the darkness was likely a curse of some sorts placed by the King of Evil, now no more. Speaking of, we can also see that later on whilst exploring Ganon's tower down in Hyrule, we find a portal of darkness connected to the Forsaken Fortress, allowing for a quick passage between the two locations. This was how Ganondorf managed to escape the sealed kingdom of Hyrule originally, and attack the life of the Great Sea. The fortress has quite the reputation from sailors and inhabitants of the Great Sea. It's known as somewhere you should avoid, and for good reason. It's Ganondorf's new home, crawling with monsters, and the former home of pirates, and once upon a time, the Gerudo warriors. In the north of the Great Sea, we can find Spectacle Island, a wee piece of land shaped out of two small peaks and a bridge connecting them. We can find the barrel shot minigame here, run by the Great Sea's most cheerful man, Salvatore. It's set up on this small little structure on the island, with the game being set up at the very top. It's nothing more than a fun minigame which Link can even win a piece of heart from, but there's history hiding in plain sight here. The name Spectacle Island, as well as the shape of the island itself, is a reference and continuation of Spectacle Rock, a reoccurring location throughout the series which we first saw in the very first Zelda game, as well as the second, A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, and most recently in the Wilds era games. The exact location tends to move around, but this rock formation of two peaks connected by a bridge has been appearing time and time again across the series. In its first appearance, Spectacle rock is the entrance to Ganon's lair. Now, unfortunately Ganon's tower deep below the sea isn't directly below here, though that would have been a really cool detail. There's not much more to say. The island is also one of the destinations of the ghost ship, but otherwise, it is just a small mini-game island. Despite the world being flooded and washed away, some of the world remains from the high mountaintops. This one continues a rather small, but pretty interesting piece of Zelda lore. One of my favourite mysterious locations in the entire Zelda series can be found in this game. Located, well, in several places, is the Ghost Ship. A haunting phantom pirate ship, partly wrecked and transparent, illuminated by blue flames, can be seen sailing the Great Sea and haunting 7 different islands, each one depending on the moon cycle at that given time. Wherever the ghost ship appears, the weather changes to dark stormy clouds and a chilling melody begins to play. In order to enter the ship, Link must first obtain the ghost ship chart from Diamond Steep Island, one of the 7 that the ship can be sailing by. The design of the ship itself is fairly similar to the standard pirate ship style, much like Tetra's ship, but spooky. The figurehead depicts someone praying, bits and pieces are broken, but it's on the inside that gets even more mysterious. We see the ceiling cracked open, but rather than looking outside, we see spirits floating around, as well as these haunting faces on the floor. The ghost ship is truly controlled by spirits that haunt the Great Sea, with the enemies inside being posed in whiz robes, spiritual creatures. The ship even contains a Triforce shard in its treasure chest, or a Triforce chart in the original version of the game. Why is this found here? It adds so much more mystery to this location, and the frustrating but yet enticing thing is, we don't really know anything about the ghost ship. Was it a sailor of the royal family? Was it a past hero? It just appears and has this lore, but there's no backstory or explanation as to where it came from, who originally sailed it, and if it has a mission of some sorts, or just spends its days haunting the Great Sea. Why those specific 7 islands? What's the connection to the moon cycle? It's a great mystery of the Zelda series, and arguably one of the coolest but yet mysterious and spooky locations in the Wind Waker. To round it all off, after Link retrieves the Triforce piece, he's met with a loud demonic scream, and after that, he just wakes up on the back of the King of Red Lions, with the ghost ship never seen again. In the south of the Great Sea, we start this adventure on the peaceful Outset Island. Woken up by our sister Hyrule, Link is found fast asleep atop the lookout spot, and this is where the Wind Waker begins. The island is made up of 2 large islands connected by the shallow waters and this bridge at the top, linking to the Forest of Fairies. The large island is home to only few families and residents, but it's a cozy seaside settlement. It's also where Link and Hyrule live with Grandma, the parental figure in their life. They live in this home over at the end of the island, warm and homey. A family home, and Grandma's banging soup. There are other lovely personalities across the island too, such as Orca, the man who teaches Link the ways of a sword before setting off on his adventure, Zill, the Booger Kid, Sue Bell, Abe, and a few others that make up the life of Outset. A fun detail about the name is that Outset itself actually means start or beginning, which this island literally is. It's where we start and begin our adventure. The day we kick off our adventure is Link's birthday, and we learn of an Outset Island tradition where when young boys become of age of the fabled legendary hero, they're given a green tunic to wear. It's a custom here on Outset, and Link gets his green tunic from Grandma. In terms of the story, not long after Link is given his tunic, chaos ensues. Whilst testing out his new telescope, a birthday gift from Hyrule, they see a massive bird, the previously mentioned King Helmarok, and it drops somebody into the forest. Link investigates and finds Tetra up here, who seems in a rush to get back to her ship and push on. But as they head back, Hyrule is spotted waiting and waving at Link from the other side of the bridge. And in a moment of madness, the King Helmarok comes in for a second swoop, and yoinks Hyrule. Link being the brave boy he is, he attempts to dive off the cliffside and grab her, but is saved by Tetra and her pirate crew, as Link was nowhere close to catching his sister. This is what kicks off the game, as Link soon after heads to the Forsaken Fortress. Later in the story, we return to Outset Island to find Jaboon, who is found living in the cave behind the island as his home Great Fish Isle, which we'll cover in a little bit, has been destroyed. We need to find Jaboon, the water spirit, in order to retrieve Nehru's Pearl. Another hidden part of the island is the Savage Labyrinth, hidden beneath this large stone watcher. It's a challenging 51 floor run with enemies, with a reward if completed. Life here is normally peaceful, rather unbothered, and the perfect place to start our adventure. In the central waters of the Great Sea, we can uncover the Tower of Gods, an old structure hidden beneath the waves, only surfaced after obtaining the 3 goddess pearls and placing them in the arms of the statues on the Triangle Islands. 3 small triangle-shaped islands that when you draw lines from island to island, a triangle is formed, a sign of the Triforce, in the centre of which we uncover the Tower of Gods. It's a sort of dungeon, but better described as the trial to test potential heroes. Link first enters on the King of Red Lions, and the first floor is a water-based puzzle level. Using the timing of the water, Link must navigate and figure out the puzzles in order to progress up to the next floor, on which he works with Servants of the Tower statue puzzles to continue proving his worth. And on the 3rd floor, he can find another puzzle to gain the big key. During all of this, he also collects the hero's bow, as well as learns the command melody. The puzzles are unique, and the challenge is fitting to test the hero, but it's the final trial which truly proves Link's worth. A boss battle against Godan, a large head and hands, similar to Bongo Bongo from Ocarina of Time, but appearing more like a creation of the Sheikah, which would make sense if it's to test the hero. But it's what follows this trial that is really interesting in terms of the lore. After ringing the bell atop the tower, Link's trial is complete, and a mysterious entrance opens in the water. Entering this glowing circle will take Link and the King of Red Lions down into the long-lost kingdom of Hyrule, specifically Hyrule Castle. The Tower of the Gods is an insanely lore-packed location with a few unanswered questions, such as who exactly built it. We can find lots of Sheikah connections, but yet very little mentions and remains of the Sheikah across this entire game. It's connected to the gods, evident by not just the name, but also the key to surfacing the tower in the first place. Link was destined to come here, and it was written in the stars by the gods. And the fact that we find Hyrule Castle directly below must mean that the tower was previously located beside the castle before the flood happened, so it would also have had a deep connection to the royal family, also evident by the fact that King of Red Lions, the actual King of Hyrule, knows all about it. It's an insanely cool location, and something I'd personally like to see appear again, or more so, something like it. A trial for the hero as part of the main story, something to prove himself. This appears to be a creation of the Sheikah going off the blue energy and unique technology, with a heavy influence from the royal family and gods of Hyrule. Found in the north of the Great Sea, we can find Windfall Island, the most populated island in the entire Great Sea. It's a bustling market town with shops, a school, lighthouse, jail, bomb shop, and a nice little community that lives here. This is where Link first meets the King of Red Lions after being launched out of the Forsaken Fortress on his first visit. He wakes up lying on the talking boat by the shores of Windfall Island. Link naturally goes and explores the island and meets everyone, including the fan favourite, fabulous, criminal, Tingle. It's a pretty standard island at base value, but there's lore and mystery to uncover. It's said that Windfall is where most people from Castletown and Kakariko Village fled to this former mountaintop, now island. However, there have been theories and suggestions that this is possibly Kakariko Village itself. Fellow Zelda tuber Zeltic made a theory on this exact topic a little while back. I'll link it below if you want to check it out later. Now, something interesting to note is that the music for Windfall Island shares bits and pieces from Ocarina of Time's Kakariko Village, further tying their connections together. I personally headcanon Windfall Island as a sort of new Kakariko Village, but the truth isn't exactly detailed and fully known. Towards the west of the Great Sea, we can find Great Fish Isle, a not so great condition wrecked island. Homes tossed and turned over the rocks, the rock itself split and destroyed. This place is a haunting ghost town, a former home in Hylian village, now in ruin. But how did this happen exactly? Well, the backstory and lore to this seemingly small wrecked village is that Great Fish Isle is the former home of Jaboon, the water spirit, as well as being a small, highly populated village, one of those previously mentioned mountaintops that the people fled to as the Great Flood broke out. The condition we find Great Fish Isle in today is the work of Ganondorf. The King of Evil took out his anger on this innocent village, turning it upside down and wiping it clean out. The attack is described as horrific and brutal. Ganondorf likely didn't take prisoners. Some, such as Jaboon, may have escaped, but it's likely some of the residents of the island were part of Ganondorf's destruction. The only residents we can find now are the travelling merchant and Korok lender, both standing alone in the hollowed out village. Tingle himself actually tells us that this place was rather nice in its prime, indicating that it definitely had visitors from across the sea. An interesting wee piece of lore goes back to that previously mentioned comparison map from Ocarina of Time. Apparently back in the day, this was the location of Lake Hylia. Obviously not with a water level this high, but somewhere deep below Lake Hylia would have been found. The only other notable information is that we find a Triforce shard in the shallows around the island, but otherwise Great Fish Isle is a tragic story. A cute wee village out at sea that was brutally wiped out and made unrecognisable by Ganondorf's rage and destruction. In the southeast of the Great Sea, we can find the Forest Haven and Forbidden Woods, two twinning forest islands that contrast hard in their conditions. The Forest Haven looks relatively healthy and welcoming, and the Forbidden Woods looking dangerous and closed off. The Forest Haven is a paradise-like home of the Koroks and Great Deku Tree, encased within the hollowed out tree trunk of a former Deku Tree, one formerly much larger than the current. At first, we find the Deku Tree infested with Choo-Choos and need to help sort that out, and afterwards we're eventually rewarded with the Deku Leaf, an item that allows Link to sail through the air, as well as nudged in the direction of the Forbidden Woods. This haven is a protected area for the Guardian of the Forest. In Ocarina of Time, the Deku Tree was protected in the depths of the woods. However, due to the new conditions of the world, he's been forced to adapt, but it hasn't been smooth sailing. These darker and more menacing woods across from the Forest Haven once served as the home for the Koroks, but now it's infested with monsters and completely overgrown. A wee Korok by the name of Makar is trapped after not listening to the Deku Tree and flies over the Forbidden Woods, ending up trapped inside. This place was once peaceful, but is now a nightmare for the little Koroks. We can even see the history inside with the Kokiri markings on the doors. Speaking of which, that's a rather interesting bit of lore to go into. Koroks are the evolution of the Kokiri, the young children of the forest seen in Ocarina of Time. The effects of the Great Flood and adapting to the new seaside lifestyle have turned them into these adorable little creatures. I love Koroks, especially a little Korok. The Forbidden Woods is also the third dungeon in the game, and given the backstory of it being the former home of the Koroks, possibly even dating back to the days of the Kokiri, it's pretty cool. The boss and mini-boss are also plant-based enemies, which fits the theme well, and at the end of it all, we rescue Makar, and are rewarded with not only Farore's Pearl, but also this really cute Korok concert in the Forest Haven. Now for the final famous location that I've chosen to cover in the lore of Zelda's famous locations, the Wind Waker edition. Dragon Roost Island. without a doubt the best place to go solely just to sit and vibe to the soundtrack. Dragon Roost is very well known for its music alone, a fast-paced catchy tune that perfectly captures the vibes of this volcano, Rito-inhabited island. Found in the northeast of the Great Sea, this is the home of the Rito tribe, the very first appearance of the Rito in fact, and right off the bat, this is some interesting lore. The Rito are the evolution of the Zora seen in Ocarina of Time, forced adaptation to the new flooded setting. They went from aquatic fish people to flying bird people. The Zora in Ocarina of Time did just fine in the fresh water of the rivers, Lake Hylia and Zora's domain, but it appears the salty water of the Wind Waker's Great Sea wasn't suitable for them, forcing this rather quick evolution into the Rito. On the inside, we can find the mail center run by the Rito, a massively connected postage system that connects the entire world of the Great Sea. We see these red post boxes across the islands of the sea. These are run by the Rito Postal Service, and right here on Dragon Roost is where everything is sorted and sent out. An interesting and slightly questionable piece of lore goes back to the comparison map we've been referring to across this video. According to it, Dragon Roost Island was formerly Zora's domain, which kind of makes sense given the Zora turned into the Rito, but what doesn't fully add up is where this volcano came from. Granted, Death Mountain is not far from Zora's domain, so perhaps they sort of merged over time, which, while sounding odd, is a very common thing in Zelda games. Geography is never one for one, but often closely connected, just not 100%, and this makes sense as having each game one for one would become too repetitive. If Zora can evolve into birds in this short time frame, I'm sure land can merge as well. Dragon Roost Island isn't just the home of the Rito, however, it's also home to the game's second dungeon, Dragon Roost Cavern. A volcanic cavern which is normally ventured by young Rito children in order to reach the sky spirit Valoo, who you may have noticed sitting at the top of the mountain earlier. This is in order to receive one of his scales, a Rito tradition for them to grow their wings. However, recently the sky spirit has been enraged, and for reasons not known to the Rito, who have in recent times been unable to venture up to visit Valoo. This is why Link enters the cavern, to find out what's going on. The inside is dangerous with fire geysers, bokoblins, keese, magtails and other enemies crawling around. On the outside sections we find Kargaroks pecking at Link as well. It's a thrilling adventure and concludes with Link discovering that the reason for Valoo's rage is the dungeon boss, Goma. A lava-based take on Ocarina of Time's Queen Goma, pulling on the tail of the Sky Spirit, causing understandable irritation. If someone was yanking my chain without me wanting it, I'd probably be annoyed too. Link sorts this out by slaying the beast with the help of his new item, the grappling hook, which by the way is so epic to use up here, and brings peace back to Valoo and Dragon Roost Island. Following this, Prince Kamali of the Rito gives Link's Din's Pearl as a thank you for helping them, which would later be used to surface the Tower of the Gods. Dragon Roost Island is one of the most iconic and well-known locations, not just in the Wind Waker, but the series as a whole. Its epic design and banger soundtrack are just two base factors as to why, and a fun little reference is that in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Rito Village's theme is actually a rendition and callback to Dragon Roost Island's theme. But the island itself contains a lot of cool lore, from the Rito history and current situation, to being the home of the Sky Spirit, Valoo. The only appropriate way to end this video in my opinion is to just have a wee listen to Dragon Roost Island music play us out into the horizon. Enjoy! Let's begin this adventure through Hyrule's lore by starting at the mighty beating heart of the kingdom, Hyrule Castle. This is the largest, most expansive and explorable castle in the entire series. In the open world setting of the Wilds era games, we can almost fully explore the castle, minus areas cut off by rubble and debris. As this video will be looking at the two different eras of this kingdom, the one shown in Breath of the Wild and then its sequel Tears of the Kingdom, we'll look at the locations in chronological order. The castle we first discovered in Breath of the Wild was magnificent. Despite being in ruin, it was the landmark of the kingdom, surrounded by 4 large Sheikah columns. The presence of Calamity Ganon regained strength, and the entire area crawling with guardians of all kinds. Despite being 100 years after following the Battle of the Calamity, it remains a fortress of the enemy. The castle itself is made up of several floors and layers, like a big wedding cake, topped by the throne room and peak of the castle, where we can find this wee guy if you choose to climb to the top. Other ruined and decayed room of note that we can explore are the royal dining room, the lockup, the library, the docks, the gatehouse, the courtyards, the guard chambers, Princess Zelda's room and study, the King's study, and of course the Astral Observatory, where the final battle against Calamity Ganon takes place. It's a stunning work of art, and it's truly criminal that we never get to explore this location in its prime. Not in Breath of the Wild, not in the Age of Calamity spin-off, nor in Tears of the Kingdom. We're limited to very few clips through memories and cutscenes that show us parts of the castle, but there are rooms we know exist but never see, such as the Great Hall. Unfortunately, that's blocked off due to the rubble when we play. It's a proper medieval-inspired castle. The fancy banners, the weapons on the wall, the overall look of the place, it's just so beautiful, and it's so amazing that we can even explore this much. In other games, we barely get to explore the insides, with exception to Twilight Princess, where the castle serves as the game's final dungeon. Now, throughout the course of the story, we don't need to visit the castle until the very end. You can of course go straight to face Ganon by climbing up to the Sanction by the throne room and facing the Great Evil, but otherwise, the only reason to really visit the castle before the final battle is to collect the Hylian shield, which can be found exclusively down in the prison levels, guarded by a massive Stalnox. When Link does come face to face with Calamity Ganon at the end of the game, if the story is done fully, there will be 4 laser beams blasting at the castle from the 4 divine beasts. This aids Link in battle by skipping out a battle against the 4 Blight Ganons that are otherwise battles within the 4 divine beasts. Ganon's cocoon bursts and drops all the way from the top of the castle to the observatory deep below the castle. Link battles the Great Evil down here and succeeds in slaying this monster. However, the battle isn't over. Following this, the final showdown goes into a second phase in Hyrule Field. Link comes face to face with Dark Beast Ganon, a giant hog, pig-like monster, the personality and evil desires of Ganon incarnated into this form. With the help of Princess Zelda, the hero seals away the darkness and saves the Kingdom of Hyrule. That's the present lore that we play through, but what about the history of the castle? Let's take it back to the very beginning. This lore now comes from Tears of the Kingdom, long before the castle was ever built. In the time which Hyrule was ruled by King Rauru of the Zonai and his Hylian wife Queen Sonia of Hyrule, the castle of this time was situated on the Great Plateau, but the castle as we know it would soon be built over Hyrule Field. During Ganondorf's assault on the kingdom in ancient times, as the King of Evil looked to be taking over the land bit by bit, King Rauru and the ancient champions, alongside Princess Zelda, went to face Ganondorf deep below Hyrule, in a location that would become known as the Imprisoning Chamber. This is where King Rauru sealed Ganondorf, deep below the surface. Far above on the surface is where Hyrule Castle as we know it would be built. Its purpose was actually to cover up these sealing grounds and protect the kingdom from this dark secret. We learn this through a stone tablet found in the secret passageways beneath between Lookout Landing and Hyrule Castle. It explains that the castle was erected to protect the secret, which in modern times has now risen to become a problem. Ganondorf rises up from the seal and pushes the castle into the sky, releasing his powerful gloom and beginning the upheaval. Now, taking things back to the Breath of the Wild told lore, 100 years before the game takes place, before Calamity Ganon returned, another great evil sealed deep below the castle. Life here was at its peak. The kingdom was highly populated. Castletown was the bustling heart of Hyrule, and the kingdom's royalty, despite being just Princess Zelda and her father King Rome, things were okay. That is until the signs of Calamity Ganon's resurrection became clear. A prophecy, a tale that the great evil would return, and return it would. In preparation, the royal family alongside the highly skilled Sheikah sought after and dug up the ancient Sheikah technology of old to defend against this evil. Guardians, divine beasts, and technology not seen for ages. However, this would actually be the downfall of Hyrule. In a plot twist, when Ganon did return and seek havoc across Hyrule, the evil being managed to plague and take control of this technology, turning the Guardian tanks against the kingdom, taking control of the divine beasts, and ultimately destroying the castle and majority of the kingdom. In the dying embers of this battle, Princess Zelda went to the peak of Hyrule Castle to face Calamity Ganon and sacrifice everything in order to hold back the evil and bring the chaos to a standstill. 100 years pass, and this is where Link begins his adventure. Those are the major events of this castle's history, though we do see more through memories. We see a struggling Princess Zelda being forced into a role by her father. We get a great insight into the throne room as the champions gather in preparation for Calamity Ganon. We return in Tears of the Kingdom to face Phantom Ganon. This version of Hyrule Castle is a marvel, one that we unfortunately never got to explore in its prime. But even in the ruins, we can tell just how massive it truly was. In fact, it's even intricately designed in terms of how both guards and royals moved around. Thanks to the Creating a Champion book, we learned that certain pathways were marked by coloured banners to mark pathways for the knights within the castle, routes leading to their chambers and the lower levels of the castle, and places such as the many armories within the castle. Oh, and a really cool detail that we can find in the throne room is this melody seen above the thrones. This is the song Zelda's Lullaby that we first saw in A Link to the Past, and made even more popular in Ocarina of Time. Now, as an extension of the castle, we of course must highlight the famous Castletown, the former heart of Hyrule, the capital. This once bustling town sits right in front of Hyrule Castle and is connected by the large metal doors that lead to the castle. Back in the day, Castletown was a beautiful place. Bright blue rooftops, watchtowers, a cathedral, markets, and so much more. It unfortunately got the first taste of the Great Calamity, and today lies in utter ruin. If you want to learn more about this ghost town, be sure to check out my other series looking at Hyrule's ghost towns. Link below. Hyrule Castle of the Wilds era is without a doubt the most expansive and explorable castle in the series. It's a proper home for the Hylian royalty, and has some extremely rich lore dating back to the sealing of Ganondorf himself. It's left in this state during the events of Tears of the Kingdom, and who knows where it goes from here. But if it can survive the events it's already been through, I see no reason why in this in-game universe it can't push on and become the thriving heart of the kingdom that it once was. Not too far from Hyrule Castle, we can find a historic site sleeping in the fields of central Hyrule. This is the Sacred Ground Ruins, or at least that's what this location is known as in Breath of the Wild. These grounds were formerly used to honour royal knights of Hyrule, those of the highest rank and prestige in the Hylian army. Not only were they honoured here, but it was in witness of the royal family. In the centre, we see the Triforce carved into the rocks. We see the symbols of the three golden goddesses and the royal wing crest. During the events of Breath of the Wild, when Link discovers this location, he'll be brought back to a lost memory that took place here 100 years ago, not long before the Great Calamity. This is where Link was formally appointed as Princess Zelda's personal knight, in witness of the other champions. While some weren't too pleased, others were happy for the hero. It's a location of high significance in Hylian culture, as well as just being pretty damn cool. But come Tears of the Kingdom, and the Sacred Ground ruins have changed quite a bit. When Link reaches the surface of Hyrule after traversing the Great Sky Islands, he's directed to head for the Lookout Landing, a brand new settlement which we had never heard of. Little would we know, it's actually built right over the Sacred Ground ruins. It's said that this settlement was created when the chasms opened up as part of the upheaval, which seems quite a quick build up, but the chances are there were already tents and a lighter setup here, as before Link and Zelda even went missing, in time with the upheaval occurring, there was already gloom seeping onto the surface and strange occurrences taking place, so investigation would have already been underway. The landing is a fort sort of settlement. A large perimeter fence has been built around the sacred grounds, and a wee settlement is formed on the inside. It's also the new home of Pura's research. She has this whole setup inside, as well as her massive telescope, not to mention the other researchers working in the Lookout Landing. As cool as all of this is, it gets even cooler. It turns out that beneath the sacred grounds is an emergency shelter, accessed by a ladder right here in the centre. In here we can find cooking pots, weapons and armour, maps and people living down here. It's a small little room, but absolutely fascinating to know that even back in Breath of the Wild, in terms of the in-game lore, there was a wee bunker down here. If you speak to Monty, who guards the bottom of the ladder, he'll tell Link that this place was originally used by the royal family in times of need. It's quite old, but they've been fixing it up as they go, using it for supplies and a wee cosy space to rest in. The emergency shelter is actually one of my personal favourite locations in Tears of the Kingdom. I just love the vibe down here. It's perfectly tucked away beneath the surface, and even more fascinating, there are secret tunnels that link to Hyrule Castle itself. They can be a bit of a pain to navigate the first time around, but they aren't too bad, and they lead us to an insanely massive piece of lore regarding the castle. If you follow the tunnels from the shelter to castle, once you reach the staircase that will bring you up to the castle, there is a stone tablet that tells the tale of why Hyrule Castle was originally built. As we went over earlier, it was originally in order to seal over the dark secret of Ganondorf. The Lookout Landing is a multicultural settlement, teeming with Zonai ruins to research, a perfect view to monitor the castle and the mysterious gloom rising from its depths, a lovely shop, miniature stable, and a historic site slap bang in the middle of it. Oh, and of course it has one of the brand new Sheikah Skyview towers. Pretty cool, right? Whilst this may have started as a potentially temporary settlement, I think that in the in-game world, Lookout Landing will be here for many years to come. Now for an all-time classic Zelda location. Found in the West Necluda region is Kakariko Village. This is a reoccurring location that we've covered in multiple episodes of this series already. From Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time, to its potential remains in the Wind Waker, Kakariko Village is a settlement of Sheikah origins. Throughout the history of the Zelda series, this location has appeared time and time again, sometimes more on the Hylian influence side, others more on the Sheikah. When we first discover this version in Breath of the Wild, it's a truly breathtaking secluded village within the pillars of Leva. Levia? I don't know. We're gonna say Leva, which actually aided in keeping this place protected during the Great Calamity. Kakariko managed to come out untouched, despite being so close to central Hyrule. Its hill-hidden and secluded location granted it natural protection. In this game, the village design takes inspiration from Japanese time periods, such as the Asuka and Jomon periods. I apologise if I butchered either of those pronunciations. It's the home of the village elder, Impa, and her granddaughter, Paya. They both live in the head house of the village, which is backdropped by this stunning waterfall and waterfill beneath with beautiful fish. We'll explore Impa's home in detail in a moment, but first let's walk around the village. The village is nothing short of a beautifully crafted home. We find wooden bridges across wee streams, compact fencing for farming, a cute watermill, and the people here are wonderful. Despite the Kingdom of Hyrule being a primarily Hylian land, the Sheikah keep their culture and traditions strong in this age. Whereas in past games we've seen Kakariko become a much more Hylian influence location, which is something I really love about them in this game. There are several cool parts of the village, such as the beautifully set up goddess statue, the hill walk up to the Great Ferry above the village, but also more somber places like the small graveyard just outside, which in itself has stories to tell. Now, inside Impa and Paya's home, we can find some incredibly interesting stuff. For starters, this is where we can find the Ancient Tapestry, a highly significant piece of history and lore, which depicts the first appearance of Calamity Ganon 10,000 years ago. This is what aided the kingdom 100 years ago in recovering the long-lost Sheikah technology, in an attempt to defend against Calamity Ganon's return. We can also find the Sheikah heirloom, a family treasure that is stolen by one of their own. A former Yiga, now Sheikah, Dorian, steals the heirloom and tries to give it to the Yiga in order to protect his own family. Link swoops in and saves the day, whilst also using the heirloom to unlock a secret shrine just above the village. Interestingly, Impa also has a photo of the location in which Link remembers his last memory, the Fields of Blatchery Plain, the place where Link fell 100 years ago. This photo is what unlocks his memory. Come Tears of the Kingdom, and the village is quite different. It's the same as Breath of the Wild, but with a lot more added on. The upheaval caused runes to fall from the sky, chasms to rip open, and create a new fascination with the Zonai. Kakariko Village becomes a hub for this. A large ruin has fallen atop the village, known as the Ring Ruins. The hills surrounding the village are covered in wooden scaffolding to traverse all the new Zonai Sky ruins. In fact, Princess Zelda herself appears to warn the people of the village not to enter them. Only that wasn't actually Zelda. Rather, a phantom of the princess, manifested and created by Ganondorf. Paya herself even talks about how odd Zelda's appearance was in her diary, saying the princess didn't utter a word about the condition of the village, nor had anything nice to say to anyone. A rather odd visit from the princess. Within the changes made to the village, we also now find the hub of Taro's Zonai research. This entire building has been not only extended, but covered in work. We even helped decipher some ruins alongside these Zonai researchers, and their work is documented right here. Generally, the village doesn't operate too differently. It has adapted well to the changes Tears of the Kingdom brought on, including the massive chasm that has opened up right where the Great Ferry once was. Oh, and a fun little fact about some of the residents of the village is that some of them are named after fruits. Paya for papaya, Kado for avocado, and Dorian for durian. There are other examples, but they're a lot less obvious and a bit more debatable. Before leaving Kakariko, there is one more site of significance here. With the expansion of explorable wells in Tears of the Kingdom, we gain access to the well below Kakariko, which is interesting, as back in the days of Ocarina of Time, deep below the well of Kakariko was a mini dungeon. A dark, damp, creepy location that is a truly horrifying experience, as well as where we found the Lens of Truth. Well, the well, in this age, might include a little nod to this past. On the walls of the rock down here, we see these red marks. It isn't outright said to be blood, but it very well seems to be hinting at the dark past of Kakariko Village. Found not far from our last location, Kakariko Village, we can find a true landmark of Hyrule, the Julian Peaks Mountain. A towering split down the middle mountain with two distinct twin peaks, giving the name. Though the story behind this seemingly natural wonder is quite interesting. So when we first discovered it in Breath of the Wild, we find two shrines at each peak. Pretty cool, and a good reason to climb to the top, if the view wasn't enough for you. However, we learn a little tale through an elderly man found in the Faron region by the name of Shay, who tells us that it's said that long ago, a dragon god split the mountain in two to forge a path. Now, it isn't said why this path must have been made, but I have a wee theory of my own. There are issues with my idea in terms of timelines, timeframes, and all of that chaos. But hear me out. So in Tears of the Kingdom, we learn that Princess Zelda becomes the Light Dragon. This happens in ancient Hyrule, before the peak was split into two, as we can see in this memory of Princess Zelda when she was in the ancient past. I believe that because she knew Link would need to take that path one day, she opened it up. Now, funny enough, in Breath of the Wild, Link is directed to take the path through the Julian Peaks. Coincidence? I think maybe. I'm not too sure. It's a fun idea, but it's near impossible to prove. Either way, the Dueling Peaks are a landmark of Hyrule, and an instantly recognisable location in the Kingdom of Hyrule that pretty much anyone across the land has probably seen. Oh, and down in the depths, there's also a point where you can ascend right from the bottom all the way to the top. I thought my game was broken the first time I did this because it took a little while. My god, what a view. Over in eastern Necluda, on the coastline of Hyrule, we can find the peaceful Heiteno village. This is somewhere that across the two games, especially Breath of the Wild, we visit often. It's a brilliantly run village atop the hills of eastern Necluda, looking out to western Necluda on the front side, and out to the sea by Heiteno Bay on the back side. In the modern day of Breath of the Wild, Heiteno Village is essentially the new capital. It's the main Hylian settlement, and was actually untouched completely by the Great Calamity. The Guardians that became corrupt and sought out destruction never managed to make it to this safe haven, and there's actually a highly significant story that comes with that. In the dying embers of the Great Calamity, Link and Princess Zelda make their way towards Heiteno Village. However, in the burning fields of Blatchery Plain, the pair are slowed down and confronted by Guardian after Guardian. This went on until Link couldn't even stand. In these dying moments, as the pair were about to be blasted by a Guardian to certain death, Princess Zelda unlocked her sacred powers, and deflected this beam, as well as taking out all of the surrounding Guardians. However, Link was down. Zelda ordered two Sheikah to take him to the Shrine of Resurrection as a last resort, and following that, she switched courses from Heiteno to Hyrule Castle to face Calamity Ganon. This peaceful and lovely village is where the two were headed, but why, might you ask? Well, for starters, it's very out of the way, and as we've established, it's quite safe from the dangers of Central Hyrule. But Heiteno is also the home of important places, such as the Heiteno Tech Lab. This is the place in which we first meet Pura and her assistant Simon, researching the ancient Sheikah technology. It's quite cool here, lots of notes, books and experiments going on. At first, the place isn't powered, and we need to help the researchers by bringing the powerful blue flame from the furnace not too far away over to the lab. A really fun little detail you can notice is these lines on the floor, marking what's Pura's and what's Simon's, as they contrast each other. Simon is a very neat and tidy researcher. Pura is a chaotic but efficient researcher. Throughout the course of Breath of the Wild, we work alongside her to restore and refine the Sheikah Slate's ruin abilities, so we visit this place fairly often. Another cool little detail is this Divine Beast looking model hanging from the ceiling. We're not too sure what exactly it is, but it's commonly theorized to have been a concept for a Divine Beast, perhaps in place of Varuta or a fifth Divine Beast in the base game. It's a fascinating lab, and even has this giant telescope pointed at Satori Mountain, perhaps a location that they are researching. Another point of interest in the village is this home over to the side. Accessed by a wooden bridge, it lies in this beautiful wee plot of land alone, and it's believed to have once been Link's home, back before the Great Calamity. When we find it in the modern day, it's in line to be demolished as it is laid empty for many years. However, Link has the opportunity to buy the home and make it his own, so he essentially has to buy his house back due to his absence for the last 100 years. Can't have shit in this economy. But over time, Link can decorate and furnish his new old home with the help of the Hudson Construction Company, the same company who are responsible for these different looking buildings. We'll be visiting this company later on in the video for another location, but for now, let's look at some more of Heiteno. There's the shop where you go to die, your clothes, as the kind owner puts it, a lovely wee inn in the centre of town, a general store, and a lot of crops and farms. Heiteno has a massive agriculture scene. It's a nice place, and when the time frame of Tears of the Kingdom rolls around, a good few years after Breath of the Wild, the place undergoes some changes. Mushrooms, shrooms, mushies, whatever you call them, Heiteno has got them. Heiteno has fallen into a TikTok trend and became crazed with mushrooms. This is thanks to new character, Hylian fashionista, Cece. This lady has an obsession with mushrooms and has turned that love into fashion. And it caught on. Many residents of Eternal Village can now be found wearing stylish mushroom hats and clothing. It's such an awesome vibe if you ask me. However, not every resident agrees. In fact, this whole mushroom craze ties into the Eternal Mayor elections, as Cece and Reedy go head to head. Link manages to help them work together in the end, but it's quite the side quest and a cool insight to Hylian politics. The influence of the mushrooms changes the appearance of the village by decorating every nook and cranny with bright, vibrant mushrooms. This fashion craze can even be seen across the kingdom far and wide. You'll encounter people travelling who wear this new, trendy look all the time. It all started here in Eternal Village. One further really cool addition to the village in Tears of the Kingdom is the brand spanking new school. Set up by Princess Zelda sometime following the ending of Breath of the Wild, this absolute saint, the princess of the people, set up a school, and we can even drop in on classes to get some insight to what the local kids are being taught. Alright then. It's seriously a wonderful place to be. Other changes that happened between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom include Link's house now being marked as Zelda's house. Has she moved in? If so, where does Link sleep? Robbie from the Akalitech lab has also moved over to the Hateno lab, with Pura now being located at the Lookout Landing. Hateno remains to develop well. It's in a great location and appears to be doing just fine. It's a nice village. Speaking of nice villages, let's take a move to the southern coastline of Hyrule and take a wander into Lurelin Village. Yet another untouched settlement from the Great Calamity. When we first discover Lurelin Village, it is best described as a seaside paradise. It's very different here. The culture, while still Hylian, is different from the rest. It's a lot more relaxed. The people of Lurelin have lived a very secluded life, with most of them only really knowing the southern shores. The settlement is primarily a fishing village, as well as a little bit of agriculture. You'll find loads of boats, spears and equipment. It's a shame we don't get to go out sailing in the game on one of these. It would be so much fun. The village itself doesn't contain many major points in the story, but there are some mysteries and lore to highlight. Firstly, the potential Zonai connections. It had been theorized by some that the people of Lurelin may be descendants of the Zonai. This was before we got a look at the actual Zonai in the next game, of course. But the reason for this was the swirl we see across the village. It's quite similar to that of the Zonai swirl, not necessarily one for one, but pretty close. And there's also just no way to prove that this means they are one of the same. Perhaps with the people of Lurelin living so close to the Zonai ruins of Faron, they adopted this swirl and made their own version of it. There's another Zonai relic just beside the village too, a Mirror of Twilight lookalike at the Palmeri ruins, which is part of a shrine puzzle. It's never really explained what this is, but it's clearly referencing the Mirror of Twilight. This small settlement has a general store, inn, and the usual stuff you'd expect, but it also has a gambling building. They really are living life out here unscathed by the Great Calamity. However, this luck would unfortunately change come Tears of the Kingdom. In the sequel, if you go down to Lurelin Village for another relaxing getaway from the main story, you will unfortunately be disappointed, and honestly quite shocked, as Lurelin Village has been destroyed, torn to pieces by nasty pirate invaders, with their ship docked right in the bay. This was the perfect opportunity for Nintendo to introduce a new monster type, but instead these pirates are actually just the regular bokoblins and boss bokoblins found across Hyrule. Alas, Link must venture in and slay them all, making Lurelin safe to step foot in. Following this, we can actually take part in repairing the village by gathering resources and using our new hand abilities to help fix the place up. Lurelin is a peaceful, relaxing village. It's also right beside Tough Mountain, where we can find the Lover's Pond, the place where individuals go hoping to meet their future partner. These palm trees and boat-shaped homes are iconic, as are the people of Lurelin, and their unique culture and lifestyle, compared to the rest of the kingdom. Not far from Lurelin are those mysterious Zonai ruins I briefly mentioned. If you don't know what these are or why they are mysterious, then you must have missed out on the Zonai craze of the Breath of the Wild YouTube era. Long before Tears of the Kingdom released and completely changed our view on who the Zonai were, the theories and speculations regarding them were fascinating. At this point, all we knew about them was that these ruins, along with a few others across the kingdom, were of Zonai origin. They were said to have been a potentially barbaric tribe, but we didn't really know much. These ruins being the main ones, presumed to be their home. They were described as a mysterious ancient tribe, magic wielders, worshippers of owls, dragons and boars. 3 animals that symbolise the Triforce of wisdom, courage and power. We also found the barbaric armour, which was believed to belong to the Zonai. What we thought we knew at this time was quite different from how things turned out, and personally, I loved that. I love that this was a complete twist from what we expected. In Breath of the Wild, the Zonai ruins were primarily explored to find the Spring of Courage, located within the jaws of the giant serpent statue, but otherwise there wasn't much more about them, other than old ruins to look at and ponder on. But once Tears of the Kingdom came out, everything changed. The Zonai were revealed through King Rauru to be not quite what we thought. He isn't exactly barbaric. We found out that the Zonai might have had different phases of life, as the life Rauru tells us about, as well as his sister Minoru, is one of advanced technology and prosperity. We don't get to see the Zonai in their prime, but we do get to see their work. All we actually see with our eyes is Rauru and Minoru through Zelda's memories. But the ruins found in Faron have changed a little bit in Tears of the Kingdom. They become part of the questline to venture up to the Dragonhead Isles, in order to explore the Construct Factory, and eventually the Spirit Temple, where we collect the final secret stone off of Minoru. This expansion allows us to enter the ruins through small rooms. Nothing massively groundbreaking to be honest, but pretty cool regardless. There's also these large horns now atop the statues, which play a role in calming the storm high above. The Zonai ruins of Faron will always be remembered as one of the Zelda theory and lore community's biggest interests, and whilst I could probably talk about them alone for hours, I'll leave that to the Zonai experts out there, as we already have hour-long videos on the Zonai. Continuing from the Zonai ruins of Faron, let's look at the other highly significant Zonai ruins of Hyrule. Found in the north, just beyond the Lost Woods, we can find Typhlo ruins, shrouded in a dark cloud, only explorable with some sort of light such as a torch. These mysterious Zonai ruins were also a massive talking point in the Zelda theory and lore community during Breath of the Wild's peak on YouTube. It's not known why they're shrouded in darkness. Nobody explains or even hints at a reason. Perhaps it's due to Calamity Galen's malice and evil. But really, it's a truly unsolved mystery that still stands today. Inside we find a Sheikah shrine, as well as a Hinox hiding in the darkness. Typhlo was arguably an even more complex mystery of the Zonai at this time, but man, did Tears of the Kingdom give us answers in a way that nobody probably expected. In the sequel, the darkness that covered the ruins has vanished, once again unexplained. The Zonai researchers have set up a little camp in the middle of the ruins, as well as a Skyview tower. We finally get to explore these ruins in full detail, without the darkness covering the majority of them. What's even more interesting is that following the completion of each dungeon in the game, we can begin to unlock a sort of puzzle here, one that once completed opens up a secret staircase to below the ruins. What we find down here is truly remarkable. There is a stone tablet here that tells us that Typhlo ruins was actually not the work of the Zonai, despite appearing as the same architecture style as seen in Faron. Rather, it was built by the Hylians. This broke what we knew about Zonai architecture entirely, as these ruins are the exact same style as those found in Faron, so either the Hylians replicated them, or they're both Hylian made. I personally believe the former, and that the Hylians just replicated the work of the Zonai, but we don't know for sure. It's all quite different from the Zonai architecture seen with Rauru and Minoru. Perhaps this was a much more primitive time frame of the Zonai, and that stood the test of time. The stone tablet tells us that Typhlo Ruins was built in honour of King Rauru, for the sacrifice he made in sealing Ganondorf, keeping the kingdom safe for years and years to come. What we thought we knew was completely flipped upside down by this information, and whilst that didn't sit well with some fans, like I said earlier, I personally love these unexpected 180s with the lore. Typhlo Ruins are certainly one of the most interesting and lore significant locations in the Kingdom of Hyrule, standing proud in honour of King Rauru. Starting off where I left the last video, as we reach the Gerudo Desert Gateway, we can look out to the main settlement of these lands, Gerudo Town, the home of the all-female population, Gerudo, known for their strong, tall warriors, strictly guarded entrance points, but extremely beautiful insides. Gerudo Town is a unique place. Not only is it found in the middle of the harsh Gerudo Desert, but the way of life here is different to the rest of Hyrule. As mentioned, the Gerudo are entirely female, bar one Gerudo male born every 100 years, typically Ganondorf. Living so secluded from the rest of Hyrule, you'd maybe think that they tend to stay here, but their way of life and culture is quite the opposite in fact. From a young age, the Gerudo are actually taught and educated about what leaving their home will be like, with a focus on finding a partner. There are actual classes here to help Gerudo women find their true love, and this unique part of their culture is one of my favourite little details about them. In the centre of town we find this marketplace, with stalls selling everything. There are lots of little alleyways with other oddities round each corner, from a Sanseal rental place to a bar where Link can grab a cold one. The warriors train in the northeast of the town, next to the throne room, which is where you'll find Lady Riju, the young but powerful leader of the Gerudo. But how she came to this role so young is quite sad. Unfortunately, Riju's mother was murdered by the Yiga clan, servants of Ganon who reside in the north of the desert. Being the only child, Riju fell straight into the role, and despite not even being a fully grown adult, she commands the Gerudo people. Though it hasn't been easy. The people were not sure about her being so young. Then the Thunder Helm was stolen by the Yiga. On top of that, in the time frame of Breath of the Wild, Divine Beast Vanaboris is causing a storm. Riju is, to be fair to her, out of her depth at this point, but with the help of Link, she truly grows into a leader. Together, the pair recover the helm, settle down Vanaboris, and bring peace and strength back to Gerudo Town, making her ancestor Urbosa more than proud. Come Tears of the Kingdom, and Gerudo Town is in a state. We find the settlement essentially abandoned, overrun by redeads, trashed and truly horrifying. But we soon discover that it hasn't truly been abandoned. It turns out that there is an underground shelter, but the entrance is sealed in order to protect the Gerudo people. In order to enter, Link has to drop down into the waterways below and find a secret passage in, and it's down here that he learns of their troubles with the recent sudden increase of redeads and storms. The existence of this bunker is quite significant lore in itself, but we go on to learn some even heavier lore that is found in this shelter. Working alongside a now more matured Chief Riju, we discover this ancient mural, depicting a triangle with 3 key points. This is a puzzle, and it spans across a large area of the desert just behind Gerudo Town. Solving it uncovers something truly magnificent and significant in Gerudo lore. This mural is the answer to uncovering the long-lost Lightning Temple, a giant pyramid-like structure that serves as one of the 4 main dungeons in the game. That's the main lore of Gerudo Town, but there are other smaller bits and pieces that you might find interesting. For example, if you decide to check out Riju's bedroom, you'll find these really cute Sanseal plushies, the very same kind that we see in this minigame in Tears of the Kingdom. In the lower west end of Gerudo Town, we find a secret word-of-mouth shop, locked behind a hidden passcode. In here, Link can freely enter as a presenting male, something that will get him tossed out of town if he reveals in public. They sell unique clothing that cannot be found anywhere else. An odd, but clearly just video game logic detail, is that the town has an unlimited water source from nothing. If you follow all the wee streams of water that flow along the rooftops and down into the waterways, the source of this water is the top of the palace where Riju lives. However, if you climb to the top, you'll just find this little pool of water that creates a never-ending source of water. A true Zelda mystery. Gerudo Town is a unique place with lots of lore across the two games, all topped by this banging soundtrack. Boom, boom, boom. Dun. In northern Lanayru, tucked away within the mountains that wrap around the water, we can find the stunning and massive Zora's Domain. It's not your typical structure made out of standard stone, wood or metal. It's a unique blue sort of stone material making up these beautiful colours seen throughout, topped by this gorgeous fish detail atop the domain throne room. You'll find loads of pools and streams of water here, as you know, the Zora are fish people. The domain has arguably the best geographical protection you could ask for. It's surrounded by this large mountain that wraps around it, and the only routes to reach the domain and mountaintops are by traversing up the Zora River, which has multiple checkpoints and guards along the way. Being the home of the Zora, this is where we can find the Zora royalty. In the day of Breath of the Wild, that's King Dorothan and Prince Sidon, with Princess Mipha sadly no longer being with us. We work with the King and Prince during the Divine Beast Vah Ruta questline, becoming great friends with Sidon, even riding on his back in order to make an entry into the dungeon. But it's Link's history with the late Mipha that is the most significant. Prior to the Great Calamity 100 years ago, the hero and Zora Princess were quite close, a little bit more than just friends. And this is proven, as Mipha had a ceremonial armour ready to give Link, which in her culture is traditionally meant for a future husband. Link and Mipha spent a lot of time together growing up as well. She would often heal his wounds with no hesitation. Unfortunately, she fell to the hands of the Great Calamity, but is remembered by this statue of her in the centre of Zora's domain. Some notable things around the domain are the expert craftsman Dento, who creates light scale or ceremonial tridents for Link. There's the usual shops and whatnot, a hall of pools of water primarily used for a space for the Zora to sleep, as they do so in water. The Great Zora Bridge leading up to the domain is a work of art itself. Stretching the long length over Ruto Lake, it's quite amazing. The throne room is also a work of art, a stunning open area at the top of the domain, directly below that massive fish structure. Come Tears of the Kingdom, and the domain isn't in the nicest of conditions. It's a mess, covered in this thick sludge coming from a sky island high above. This is the opening clue to one of the main dungeons in the game. The location lore of Zora's domain really expands in this game. For obvious starters that we see right away, the statue of Mipha has been replaced with one of Prince Sidon and Link for their work in Breath of the Wild. Mipha's has been moved to the top of Ploymus Mountain, where this whole area has been built up with a pool, stairs, and of course the statue that is now found here. This was originally the home of a Lionel that we had to fight back in Breath of the Wild. We explore this area as part of the questline to sort out this mess, and during so we learn quite a lot of new lore. For starters, Sidon has a fiancée, Yona, who is actually from another domain in lands unknown to us. We learn this from her character bio, confirming that somewhere out beyond the Kingdom of Hyrule is another Zora royal family. The king is found to have a wee hideout behind one of the surrounding waterfalls, keeping himself safe from the sludge and any other possible threats. We discover a long-lost ancient site created by the Zora as well. Found at the bottom of the East Reservoir Lake is the ancient Zora Waterworks. Which, lore aside, I personally believe this would have made a much better dungeon than the actual one we got for this region, but more on that in a wee bit. We enter these ancient grounds in order to activate this central mechanism, creating a pathway up to the Sky Islands above the domain, where that thick sludge is coming from. This takes us to the Water Temple, which is basically just a large sky island with a water theme. Lore aside, I personally think it's one of the weaker dungeons, and lacks Zelda water dungeon identity, and that the waterworks below would have made a better fit. But oh well, I just think it would have been cooler if we had to go up to the Sky Islands to activate something, and then back down to the waterworks for the actual dungeon, but oh well. Following the completion of this dungeon, the thick sludge that was covering Zora's domain clears, as the dungeon boss Mudrock was creating it all. The domain is once again clean and pure, a beautiful sight for all, and the mighty home of the Zora people. A true fan favourite location with some very cool lore is the lone settlement of Akkala, built from the ground up. This is Terrytown. Found on this bridge rock platform, the town is unique as there is literally only one way in and one way out. There are 6 buildings that form in a circle shape around the platform, but it wasn't always this way during our playthrough. In fact, it was quite different. If you were to travel straight to this location after leaving the Great Plateau, you wouldn't find this settlement. Rather, you'd find a lonely goddess statue, which is a curious mystery that I've investigated a good while ago. The platform is just rocks. Terrytown needs to be built from the ground up, and this is done through an extensive side quest with Hudson, who we meet in Hateno Village about to demolish Link's house. He has a dream to build something of his own, and that's Terrytown. We find him out here after beginning the quest, working on the large rocks, and together, Link helps him build this place by bringing materials such as wood. Over time, Hudson creates homes here, and by the end of the questline, there is a brand new settlement here in Akkala. Part of the quest is also finding people to help and eventually live here. Hudson's condition is that their name ends in son as well. This is a fun and unique part of the quest, as not only do we need to find people to help with certain tasks, but also meet his name requirements. Once Terrytown is up and running, we can find homes, a shop, an inn, and a truly beautiful wee town in the most beautiful region of Hyrule. And no, there is no debate on that. Akkala is the most beautiful. Hudson also meets his soon-to-be wife through this project, Ronson, and we witness their wedding right here in Terrytown, concluding the questline. When the time frame of Tears of the Kingdom rolls around, Terrytown has been blowing up. No, I'm just joking. When the time frame of Tears of the Kingdom rolls around, a good few years later, Terrytown has become more than just that. Hudson's project has expanded, and on what was once just an empty field with old ruins and menacing guardians, is now the Hudson construction site, and there's even a wee ride to get down to there from the town. On top of this, Hudson's construction company can be found all over Hyrule, as he is at the helm of repairing parts of the kingdom with these small building sites, and advertisement signs being found far and wide. The construction site itself is quite cool, and even offers a great minigame where Link has to build some sort of vehicle and take on a racecourse. The construction company also offers Link an opportunity to build his own custom home just north of Terrytown. In the town itself, there is now a new site. Kilton now has this little plot where he makes statues of monsters. An interesting, but welcome addition. Hudson and Ronson also now have a wee girl, Madison. We take part in a quest involving the three and Madison gaining independence. A touching and pretty fun quest. For what started as nothing more than rocks and a lonely goddess statue, to then a small town, to now a fully developed area within Akkala, is quite remarkable, and Link was a huge part of making this all possible. In the northeast of Hyrule, atop the mighty Death Mountain, we can find the home of the Gorons, Goron City. A strong rock-built settlement with lava streams and friendly brothers all around. The city sits around here on the mountain, far up enough to be in the extreme heat conditions, but still a bit away from the peak. We find the usual shops and stuff across this unique city. The Gorons are hard-working people. Most of them do very manual jobs requiring a lot of strength, such as mining precious gems or working with metal. That is the main industry of the Gorons. Aside from the already unique setting, there is one massive lore significant feature of the city to highlight: the rock carvings of past Goron figures. Here we can see famous Gorons from over the years: Darmani III and the Elder Son, both seen in Majora's Mask, Goron from Twilight Princess, and of course Daruk, the former champion of Hyrule from Breath of the Wild. Daruk was a very famous warrior, with a big heart and an appetite for battle. Daruk's grandson Yunobo is alive in this day and age. He lives right here in the city, and we work with him during the main questline in fact. However, it's Bluto who's the boss of Goron City. The settlement in this age gives us a brilliant look at their life and culture. The Gorons are an all-male race of brothers, and they are thriving at the moment. However, the reason Link ventures up here is to help sort out the Divine Beast situation atop the mountain, as it's causing the volcano to become angered and unpredictable, sometimes even causing issues in the city itself. Working with the young Goron Yunobo, Link does successfully help them out, and Goron City returns to a peaceful state. In Tears of the Kingdom, the lore of the city and those within it really expands. Previously in the Breath of the Wild era, Yunobo was a bit of a silly character and not super memorable. However, in Tears of the Kingdom a few years down the line, he has changed. But not for the better. Unfortunately, Yunobo has been changed by the mask he wears along with the outfit. This was given to him by Phantom Zelda, a creation of Ganondorf, causing Yunobo to act strange and not in the best interests of the Gorons. He now also has a whole company set up across the whole mountain, never mind the city. Gorons are eating marbled rock roast, which is actually tainted with gloom, making Gorons ill. The mountain temperatures have also dropped massively since the last game. There are a lot less lava pools and rivers now, opening up areas outside the city for us to explore as well. The changes that Tears of the Kingdom brings are more present outside of the city itself, but the settlement does undergo some small changes. The statues of Goron heroes are now decorated, with their eyes having lights. There are new Gorons to meet around town, and generally, life here is good. Physically, the city doesn't change much between the two games apart from some minor changes, but it's still somewhere that's extremely welcoming and always lovely to visit. You know, once Link sorts out Yunobo and brings him back to reality. Out by the Heber region in the northwest of Hyrule, we can find one of the most elegant and, yet again, unique settlements in Hyrule. This is Rito Village. A tall, slender home built across these pillar rocks within Lake Totori. The Rito are a very special and unique group. They are bird people, but they weren't always. The Rito are actually an evolved form of the Zora, which is a little confusing considering we also see the Zora in this game. But regardless, we learn that the Rito evolved from the Zora during the events of the Wind Waker, as Hyrule became flooded. The Zora adapted and evolved into bird people. Their home is remarkable. It's built wrapped around this massive pillar. Stairs spiral around and walkways expand outwards to these pods, which are really cool in design as they resemble bird cages. Which is fun because, you know, the Rito are bird people. The top of the pillar the village is built around also acts as a bird perch. After the completion of the Divine Beast Va Meadow questline, the Titan rests up here, exactly like a bird on a perch. The music of Rito Village is also quite interesting. It's a slowed down rendition of Dragon Roost Island from the Wind Waker, the home of the first ever Rito people that we saw. The village has many fun characters and families that Link can talk with. Key figures such as Chief Kennelly were a big part of kicking off the questline to calm Va Meadow down. Kennelly himself is a more unique Rito, suiting more of an owl-like look and being much larger than most other Rito, a wise and fitting chief. There's also the likes of Hearth, who despite denying it, is definitely in his emo phase. Sorry. Lifestyle. Hearth is the village craftsman, particularly with bows, which is something really big in Rito culture, producing some of the best archers Hyrule has ever seen, such as the champion Rivali, who, despite Link and him not seeing eye to eye, was an excellent archer, and from Rito Village. There's also Harf's close friend Teba, who we meet at the flight range, and fly up to Va Meadow with in order to enter the Divine Beast. The people of Rito Village are strong warriors, loving people, and a really close-knit community who live an excellent life out here. Now, whilst not always found at Rito Village, there is another highly significant Rito who cannot go unmentioned, and that is Cass. The travelling bard who, like Kennelly, looks a little different to most Rito, taking on the appearance of a parrot-like bird. Cass can be found all over Hyrule, travelling and singing songs, but his home is Rito Village, along with his wonderful family. A few years down the line, and not only is Cass nowhere to be seen, but Rito Village is in quite the state. It's harshly frozen over and has become too cold for even the hardy Rito to live in. This is due to the regional phenomena going on here, due to the upheaval caused by Ganondorf. The ancient Stormwind Arc has returned high above the Hebra Mountains, and this has caused crazy weather to occur in the region. Times are tough here, and many Rito can now be found at the nearby stables, as their home has become pretty much uninhabitable. It oddly looks beautiful, and the music is also really nice to listen to, but Rito life has been altered massively because of this, and it doesn't return to normal until Link has ventured up to the Wind Temple above and handled things there. Once the village has returned to its former state, everyone is cheerful and happy once again. But as mentioned, Cass, who once you completed his questline in Breath of the Wild, returns to Rito Village. He can no longer be found here, or anywhere across Hyrule for that matter. His family are still here, but they say nothing on his whereabouts. It's never explained or even hinted at. He could be away in other lands practicing his craft, or maybe something happened to him. It's an odd mystery that we probably won't get an answer to. Between the two games, Rito Village is one of my favourite places to visit. It's in a stunning location, has some incredibly unique people to meet, lots of really cool side quests that go into Rito lore, and all round is just a great place to be. In the Hyrule Ridge region, we can find one of Hyrule's most beautiful natural locations. One packed with lots of lore. Satori Mountain can be seen from afar, but up close it's even more pretty. At random times of the day or night, the mountain can be seen with this bright blue greenish glow bursting out from the peak. An eye-catcher that if you haven't seen before would instantly draw your interest. At the base of the mountain we can find the Sanadin Park ruins, which offer a great view up close. Naturally, you'll want to explore the top of the mountain to investigate the mysterious glow, which, fun fact, you can actually see over in Hateno Village. The Sheikah researchers appear to be monitoring it, as their telescope is pointed right at the mountain. Little do they know that if you head on up to the peak during its glow, you'll find something truly magical. This is the home of the Lord of the Mountain, along with many bluepies, magical wee creatures that drop rupees if attacked. The Lord of the Mountain has a lot of lore behind it. For starters, its other known name, Satori, is a reference to the late Satoru Iwata, the former president and chief executive of Nintendo. He sadly passed away before the launch of Breath of the Wild and Nintendo Switch, but was a massive part of their development and Nintendo's success. The Lord of the Mountain, or Satori, is a way of immortalizing Iwata's legacy into the game. The Lord of the Mountain lore also extends to what is said by its camera rune description, saying that he was once an ancient sage of the land, who now in this form looks over the animals and nature of the land. If you explore Satori Mountain, you'll find lots of very interesting details. For starters, there are endless amounts of food, plants and vegetation here. From herbal gardens with a wide variety you wouldn't find together in this region, to durian trees, which are otherwise exclusively found in the Faron region. There's water, apple trees, animals, and lots of nature. The fact we can find region-exclusive stuff growing here really speaks to how unique this location is. Anything and everything grows here. Anything and everything can live here. This is the home of Hyrule's nature. In Tears of the Kingdom, the blue glow has, for reasons unknown, stopped appearing. It never shows up now, and it isn't explained why. However, the Lord of the Mountain can still be found up here. but it's now by dropping an offering to the cherry blossom tree. This can also be done anywhere across the map now, and as a result, Satori will reveal all nearby caves by highlighting them with a similar, but more faint blue glow. Satori Mountain also has an explorable cave now, with a giant foe inside, so proceed with caution. Most interesting of all the Tears of the Kingdom developments is what we find deep below the mountain, down in the depths of Hyrule. Directly below, we can find Bloopy Burrow, a home of many burrows and tunnels where it seems the Bloopies live. This discovery was really cool to me, and works so well as the depths is of course mirrored to the surface. So where there are mountain peaks on top, are deep dips below. In this case, it's Bloopy Burrow. Mount Satori will forever be an interesting and beautiful location. A place where nature thrives, touching tributes were made, and a lot of really cool lore exists. North of Hyrule Castle lies a great forest clouded by a mysterious thick fog. A large pink tree pokes out from the middle. This is the Lost Woods. A famous location throughout the history of the Zelda series, seen in The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Oracle of Seasons, Four Swords Adventures, Spirit Tracks, A Link Between Worlds, and now Breath of the Wild in Tears of the Kingdom. The Lost Woods is teeming with lore and mysteries a belter. You can only enter via one lone path found on the eastern side of the woods, just up the road from the military training camp ruins. Once Link enters, a subtle little jingle of music plays. A hollow and slightly unsettling theme begins. You are now in the Lost Woods. Filled with thick, dense fog, dead trees, and only distant torches to try and navigate. Which, whilst that seems no problem with these guides, it gets harder the further in you go, and if you were to stray off the one route to the centre, you'll be engulfed by the thickness of the fog and brought back to the beginning of the woods. This is the mysterious and powerful protection of the Korok Forest, a safe haven found in the middle of these woods. This is also where we find that large bright tree poking out in the skyline. The Korok Forest is the home of the wee Koroks, little creatures that call this place home. They can be found all across Hyrule, hiding beneath rocks or puzzles, offering Korok seeds for finding them. This is their wonderful home, and it's a truly divine place. The Korok Forest is also the home of the Great Deku Tree, the guardian deity that looks over these lands. He's appeared in other games, most famously Ocarina of Time, where he acted as the opening dungeon in Link's Adventure, and most recently in Echoes of Wisdom. In this age, he looks over the Master Sword, which can be found resting on the pedestal in front of him. This is Link's reason for venturing in here, to retrieve the blade that was his over 100 years ago. After Link fell in battle in the fields of Blatchery Plain, Princess Zelda brought the Master Sword here to recover from its battle scars. In the modern day, Link must have at least 13 hearts to be able to pull the blade. Having less will result in an early end to his adventure. The Great Deku Tree can be explored inside as well. Walking into his lower area presents us with a shop, inn, and campfire. At the very top of the deity, we also find a little rooftop garden, which is just lovely. From this centre point of the Lost Woods, we can actually explore the further reaches that wouldn't be possible from that original main path. Through side quests, we can venture to the corners of the woods, seeing interesting locations such as Lake Saria and Mido Swamp, both named after Kokiri children in Ocarina of Time, who in terms of lore were said to have become the Koroks further down the timeline. In the darker reaches of the Lost Woods, we also find these haunting trees with wide screaming mouths, making the journeys all the more unsettling. This is all in Breath of the Wild, but once the time frame of Tears of the Kingdom rolls around, things change. A few years down the line, and that old route of entering the woods no longer works. In fact, there is no route through the woods directly that you can take. The Lost Woods has become infested with Ganondorf's gloom. It's now impossible to just walk on in like we did a few years ago. You'll simply just become lost and return to the beginning. Rather, Link must take a dive down the Minshi Woods chasm and enter from below, navigating his way through the Korok Grove down in the depths, which are an eerie woodland in the darkness. Eventually, you'll find a platform where Link can ascend up to the top and find himself in the centre of the Korok Forest. This is when we discover that the Great Deku Tree has fallen ill to the nasty gloom infecting the land. This has a knock-on effect on the surrounding Korok forest. It's no longer a fun, vibing place. It's quiet and a shell of what we once knew. In order to restore the deity to his former health, we must dive down inside the tree and face the danger that lies at the bottom. Phantom Ganon. But this battle is much more difficult than your average Phantom Ganon encounter, as this is within an incredibly enclosed space, with gloom on the floor. I remember well how many attempts this took me and how frustrated I got, but once dealt with, this restores the Great Deku Tree and Korok Forest to its former health. It's mostly the same as previously, bar some small changes such as this hidden room found if you ascend within the Great Deku Tree, even containing a wee reference to the first Zelda game. The Lost Woods and Korok Forest across these two games are a great continuation of an iconic Zelda location. Out by the stunning Akkala region, not too far from the South Akkala stable, we can find a former fortress of defense. This is the Akkala Citadel. It stands quiet these days, only patrolled by the very same corrupted guardians and monsters that caused the downfall of the Citadel. The full scale of this location expands to the parade grounds, the bridge, and of course the Citadel itself, all now lying in ruin. We can explore the outside by going up the stairs wrapping around. There are platforms on the way up where we can find cannons and other equipment. At the top we find a building that has seen better days. This was likely somewhere for people to stay or for storing things. Again, finding more cannons up here. The Citadel's purpose back in the day was to defend Hyrule against any potential threats, primarily from the eastern coastline, including unnamed invaders from out at sea. It was once Hyrule's toughest fortress, with many soldiers staying here, but there was one threat that was too much for it to handle. 100 years ago, during the events of the Great Calamity, the Akkala Citadel acted as Hyrule's final line of defense. As things became more and more dire out in central Hyrule, as the Guardians, monsters, and Ganon's force slowly took over the kingdom, the Hylian army fell back to this fortress to begin their last stance. One final effort to try and take their kingdom back. But it was too late. This is where the Hylian army's efforts met an end. They were overwhelmed by Ganon's forces, and as the insides caved in on themselves, the outsides blasted by guardian beams, the Hylian army fell, and that was the day that Ganon won. The day Hyrule fell. In the modern day, we can find a man standing on the other side of the entry bridge that is now collapsed. His name is Nell, and he's wearing ruined soldier's armour. He explains that he's visiting the Citadel to pray on the spot where his relatives fought in battle. Interestingly, some fans have suggested that he could be a ghost or spirit of a soldier that actually fell in the battles back then, revisiting the site where he fell. This is due to the condition of his armour, but there's little evidence beyond that to support this. Some fans report him not respawning after activating the tower, others do, but it's likely this is some sort of error or glitch that has since been patched, though I do find it a really cool theory. In Tears of the Kingdom, things change a little. We can now explore the insides, but they are nothing like what they would have been, or like the insides we saw in the Age of Calamity spin-off game. Rather, it's a cave that is opened up within the rubble that the insides have become. The top now has a gloom spawn ready to scare you, and over on this platform, a Thundergleeok has decided this is home. The Akkala Citadel is a seriously important part of Hyrule's history. This is where the kingdom fell in battle during the Great Calamity. But it still stands tall today, despite the damage done to it. A reminder of what this kingdom has gone through. Now, this next location isn't actually in Breath of the Wild, so we'll be starting in the Tears of the Kingdom timeframe. One effect of the upheaval caused by Ganondorf was large chasms opening up across Hyrule. If you venture down into them, you'll find a massive underworld location known as the Depths. Instantly, you're hit with a loud blast of a horn, setting the tone. Then soft but eerie music begins to play. You find yourself in a world like no other. It feels alien. The plants look different. The ground is dark, and without the help of a light root tree, everything around you is just darkness. The depths are a mirrored underworld to Hyrule. This makes for some rather unique areas down here. For example, if you explore below the Hebra mountain range, you'll find a massive drop-off where things get really dark and all sorts of creatures can be discovered. The common enemies down here are Frogs and Giant Frogs. The smaller ones are rather easy to deal with, but the big boys are a handful. You'll also find gloom-infested bokoblins, moblins, and other enemies you'd typically find on the surface. There are boss battle replays to be found as well, offering a unique challenge to the original boss fights. You can find regular overworld bosses as well, including a Gleeok. That's right, an underground battle with a dragon in the darkness. There are many key locations down here, from the old mines all over to the Colosseums, the lost city of Gorondia, the construction factory, the Gleeok den beneath Typhlo ruins, the dark skeletons that mirror the great skeletons on the surface, and of course, the Spirit Temple. There are also mysterious statues to be found down here, from mole-like people we don't know the identity of to bargainer statues that we can make deals with. As well as these phantoms that usually hold weapons, it's believed that these are the souls of soldiers that fell in battle. Below Princess Zelda's memorials on the surface, we find 3 of these in a little triangle. Rather interesting, right? The depths are also the new home of the Yiga clan. You'll find several Yiga camps down here, as well as Master Koga, who managed to survive quite the fall in Breath of the Wild. It's interesting that we find them down here, as they are Ganon worshippers, and Ganondorf is found down here. Perhaps they gravitate. We chase him around down here across several locations until we finally manage to beat him. Through the Yiga questline, you can also learn schematics for your building abilities, which is another really common thing to find down here, zonai parts for making vehicles and such. The depths is filled with zonai, which can be refined to power zonai creations, so it's no wonder there's so much ancient zonai work down here. But the most significant lore of all down here is what lies beneath Hyrule Castle, Ganondorf's lair. The source of Hyrule's gloom is found in the depths and requires quite the journey to get there. This is the deepest of the deep. You travel through old ruins, forgotten passageways that have been around since King Rauru sealed the Demon King away in ancient times. And at the bottom of it all is Ganondorf. Originally found here in the imprisoning chamber, but later found even deeper down in his gloom lair. This is where the final boss battle begins, at the deepest point of the depths. Throughout the depths, you'll also find these gloom routes, which all point back to the castle, where Ganondorf is. It appears as though they're draining all life to feed Ganondorf, a very neat attention to detail. Overall, the depths are an incredibly unique location. They contain a lot of significant lore and mysteries that you could dive into all day. I've made a dedicated video on the lost city of Gorondia, as well as the dark skeletons if you're interested in a deeper dive into those specific topics. I'll link them below. The depths are just so spooky, eerie, and just give otherworldly vibes. I love them. In the north of Hyrule, along the Tanagar Canyon, we can find one of the most lore-rich and mysterious locations in the Kingdom of Hyrule. Here, we find the Forgotten Temple, an ancient site deep within the canyon, a massive temple now in ruins. The outsides are breathtaking alone. This place is giant. The architecture is stunning, but the insides are even more incredible. It's an extremely well-designed temple, and dates back to potentially the earliest records known of Hyrule. In the current day, the effects from the calamity are still present, as it's littered with guardians in here, but if Link gets past them, he'll find something truly unbelievable. At the back of the temple, there is a giant goddess Hylia statue, the biggest in the game. Very reminiscent of the one seen in Skyloft in Skyward Sword. In fact, there's a very popular theory by Zeltic that goes into the deep connections between this temple and Skyward Sword. It's an incredible theory and I highly recommend checking it out later. He explains it and goes into it really well. The reason for coming here in Breath of the Wild is for the reward after completing all 120 Sheikah Shrines. We come here to receive a reward, the Hero of the Wild set. A unique tunic for this Link to wear. In Tears of the Kingdom, the Forgotten Temple actually expands quite significantly. If you return to the location and head to the goddess statue, you'll find it toppled over now, revealing an entrance to an area we didn't know existed. Back here, you'll find this room. There are 7 rocks surrounding this centerpiece, which we learn in ancient times was the room where the ancient champions, along with King Rauru and his sister Minoru, met up during Ganondorf's rise, forming plans and tactics on their next move. In this corner, we find a grave, with sundelions growing out. This is the grave of the late Queen Sonia, who was unfortunately murdered by Ganondorf at the original Hyrule Castle. King Rauru left a sundaline at her grave, which has caused this growth. There is another room further back that displays a large map of ancient Hyrule. There are some small differences you can notice here compared to modern day Hyrule, such as the dueling peaks not being split, as we know that they were originally just one peak, as seen in Zelda's memories, and told to us as a legend, but they were later split by a dragon. The large chunk cut out of the Hebra Mountains is also not present here, which is believed to have been created by a Divine Beast laser. The map also displays the Dragon Tier locations to help Link on his questline, as he visits here with Impa. The Forgotten Temple is easily one of the coolest locations in Hyrule. It's from a time long ago, and despite having gone through it, it still stands strong today. This next location is one of the few that won't be starting with its Breath of the Wild era first. Like the Depths, this is one that we first discover in Tears of the Kingdom. The Great Sky Islands cluster of islands is where Link sets off on his adventure to find Princess Zelda and destroy Ganondorf. In an island above the main set, Link wakes up in the Room of Awakening, surrounded by mysterious and unknown ruins, new technology. For all we know, this is a cave or a dungeon deep below Hyrule. What last happened to Link was falling down by Ganondorf, but as Link makes his way out, he quickly comes to learn that he is in the sky, very high. He must dive down to the Great Sky Islands, and it's here that we can begin to learn the lore and history of this seemingly magical place in the sky. The Great Sky Islands can be found high above the Kingdom of Hyrule, right here on the map. They became visible as a result of the upheaval caused by Ganondorf's awakening at the very beginning of Tears of the Kingdom. It serves as the game's tutorial, but is also rich with lore. The most obvious and apparent thing here is the Temple of Time. Now, that's a name we've heard a lot across the series. The Temple of Time appears in several Zelda games, often as a resting place for the Master Sword. Though this version of it looks nothing like the one we know, nor the one down on the surface. But believe it or not, this is the original Temple of Time, and it once stood where the one we know on the Great Plateau does now. We'll get into how exactly it moved in a wee bit, but let's talk about the temple's lore in this time frame. Outside the doors of the temple is where Link first meets the ancient king of Hyrule, King Rauru, in spirit form. Turns out that Rauru was that mysterious hand at the beginning of the game down in the imprisoning chamber, the one that saved Link from falling to his doom. He explains to Link briefly what's going on, and this kicks off the tutorial as Link must visit the Zonai shrines in order to open the door to the temple. Once inside, we're met with this stunning interior, water flow and machine works. It's quite elegant and like nothing we've ever seen in the Zelda series. We need to use our new ability Recall in order to make our way up here, and this leads us to the platform round the back. Over here, one of the most important cutscenes in the game takes place. This entire time, Link had been carrying the broken Master Sword following what happened not so long ago with Ganondorf. On this platform, he meets a golden orb. Not entirely sure what it is, Link approaches, and this mysterious orb asks for the blade, and in unexplainable fashion, the sword is taken through time by Princess Zelda in the ancient past, where she is stuck, and she takes the blade to heal it. A dragon then bursts through the clouds, and the sky's clear. Zelda speaks to Link telepathically, telling him to find her, gravitating him towards the Lookout Landing. So just how did ancient sites of the kingdom make their way up here? Well, it's explained by a construct that following King Rauru sealing away Ganondorf, they knew that one day a hero would emerge, and it was said it would be at this site. So in order to protect that hero, they raised them to the heavens far above. And this is where Link starts his adventure after the opening below Hyrule Castle. But it might not be just the Temple of Time, once previously found on the Great Plateau along with the original Hyrule Castle. But where is the castle up here? Well, it clearly hasn't made its way up like the temple has, but it might still be here. The original Hyrule Castle was found on the Great Plateau, and we'll get more into that location after this. The ruins that Link wakes up in, sitting high above the main Great Sky Islands, very well could be the remains of the original Hyrule Castle. I made a video a little while back going into this theory of mine, as I find it hard to believe that the temple would make it up here, but not the castle. I personally believe that these remains where we wake up in the Room of Awakening were once part of the original Hyrule Castle. But I do need to disclaim, that is not fact, just theory. There are other ruins across the island, such as what appears like a settlement of sorts, with different layouts, features and community vibes all over. We find the odd building all over the islands, to be fair. Some were likely storage, or maybe even wee workshops. All the ruins generally point towards there being a community living here at some point in time. The Great Sky Islands as a whole represent many things: peace, serenity, and divine protection. Dragon culture and lore is extremely present here. Almost every staircase, building, or ruin will have some form of dragon representation, and this just shows how heavily worshipped these creatures were in Zonai culture. So much so that the Zonai themselves were known to turn into immortal dragons. It's through their knowledge that Princess Zelda was able to, after all. We return to this location a little further into the story. It's optional, but you can take on a side quest taking you through an ancient trial of sorts, with the reward being the Zonai fabric for Link's paraglider. The Great Sky Islands are an iconic location of Tears of the Kingdom, packed with immense lore and history, mysteries, and of course, the most important thing, stunning views. Before getting into the final location of the Wilds Era episode, I want to highlight some locations that absolutely deserve to be highlighted, but I just don't think I could fit them all in with their own individual segments. From places of mystery to just places that look cool, here are my honourable highlights. The Great Plateau. Back where it all started with our first footsteps into the world of Breath of the Wild. This was our very first look at this iconic, expansive, and magnificent version of Hyrule. A post-apocalyptic world laying quiet in ruin, taken over by nature, and our knowledge on what's going on is non-existent. The Great Plateau is, if you hadn't guessed by the name, a plateau, which is a raised area of land like this. In the centre, we can find a creation of the Sheikah within this cave. This is the Shrine of Resurrection, which has been mentioned across these two videos, and this is exactly where you'll find it. This is where Link was taken 100 years ago after falling in battle, though Zelda and the Sheikah were not actually 100% sure it would work, as the shrine was still experimental, but that gamble would pay off, as this is where our adventure begins with Link waking up on this bed. As he gets his bearings and heads for the exit, this is where we get one of the most iconic shots in the Zelda series. On the Great Plateau, there is only one inhabitant here, the Old Man, who helps guide Link around, including activating the Sheikah Tower, which sets off a chain reaction causing the rest to pop up across Hyrule. He pushes Link in the direction of the 4 Sheikah shrines found on the plateau, but why? Well, it turns out that this old man is actually the former King of Hyrule, just in spirit form. We learn this atop the Temple of Time ruins after completing all 4 shrines. The king reveals himself and explains to Link exactly what has happened to Hyrule, as the hero has no memory after being in there for 100 years. After being told that the kingdom fell to the hands of the Calamity, destroying a large majority of life, especially in central Hyrule, the king guides Link off on his quest. But let's explore the plateau and what it has going on. Well, of course there is the main ruin here, the Temple of Time, an iconic Zelda location that has appeared many times across the series. Back in the day, prior to the Great Calamity, many people would have visited here to pray to the goddess Hylia. There are also 3 smaller buildings in front of it that each bear a symbol of the 3 golden goddesses that created the land. Perhaps on the way to pray to Hylia, people stopped in these individual smaller buildings to pray to each of the individual goddesses for their part in creating Hyrule. Despite the Great Plateau taking a lot of hits from the Great Calamity, this fine structure still manages to stand today. Other sites, such as the former settlement here, are not so strongly standing. We can find the remains of what once was, most noticeably down at the Eastern Abbey just across from the destroyed bridge. But there's also the likes of the fountain and where homes probably were. Back before the Calamity, there was life here on the plateau, but now it's a ghost town taken over by nature. There is natural nature as well, such as the Forest of Spirits across the northern side of the plateau, the River of the Dead on the western side, and Mount Hylia on the southern side. Atop this mountain is a very interesting detail, a grave that actually belongs to the King of Hyrule. Now, whilst that's not outright displayed in game, it is known through the game files, which titled this as the King's Grave. This makes sense as he's just been waiting here all these years for Link. Not too far down from here, in the woodlands of the southern side, below the Temple of Time, we can find the Old Man's Hut, a place where, in his disguised form, the King of Hyrule would reside. We can still find the odd active guardian up here as well. In the Eastern Abbey, there is one that is in the way of reaching the Sheikah Shrine here, which is a scary, but necessary introduction to guardians. During the Breath of the Wild DLC pack, The Champion's Ballad, we actually get a cool expansion of the Great Plateau lore. If Link returns to where he started in the Shrine of Resurrection, he can enter a trial of sorts, with a unique weapon known as the One-Hit Obliterator. Its name pretty much explains it. It can one-hit kill enemies, but on one condition. The wielder also takes on those conditions. Link himself also becomes a one-hit target. This questline adds more shrines to the plateau as well, but the truly large expansion comes after this. We enter a 5th dungeon that is found below the Great Plateau. A sort of 5th divine beast that is actually a mix of all the elements. Completing this dungeon takes us to a Sheikah monk, Maz Koshia, who in really unsettling fashion begins to stand up from his platform where every other Sheikah monk would give Link a blessing. Maz Koshia stands up and challenges Link to a battle. We are then transported to a giant floating platform in the sky to battle the highly skilled monk. Upon completion, Link is rewarded with the Master Cycle Zero, a Sheikah Tech motorbike to travel across Hyrule on, which is just ridiculously cool. The Great Plateau is where everything started, not just for Breath of the Wild as a game, but Hyrule in lore. That is what the King of Hyrule tells us, and for a while that information was a little confusing, as you'd think Hyrule Castle and Castletown were the beginnings of Hyrule. But the king says that according to legend, the Great Plateau is the birthplace of Hyrule, and in Tears of the Kingdom, we learn why that is actually the truth. Come the time frame of the sequel, and the Great Plateau hasn't actually changed all that much visually, bar for some Sky Island debris and chasms having opened up where the shrines once stood. But what does develop about this place is the lore. What we learn in Tears of the Kingdom is highly significant. We learn that this is where the original Hyrule Castle was located, long before the one as we know it ever existed. This is mostly learned through Princess Zelda's Dragon Tear memories, showing us of our time spent in the ancient kingdom of Hyrule. During this time frame, the kingdom is run by King Rauru of the Zonai, and his wife, Queen Sonia of the Hylians. We don't get any clear shots of this castle, only glimpses in the corner of certain shots, but we know it was located around here based on external shots and internal shots that give us reference points, such as this one in the throne room where we can see the Temple of Time outside. Speaking of, back in ancient times, the Temple of Time appeared as it does in the sky, as this was the original. The one we're more familiar with was built later. The castle took on a shape like this, a more pyramid-like design compared to the more medieval fantasy design of the one we know today. Back in this time frame, the plateau was built up differently, and we see various glimpses of this throughout Zelda's memories, but sadly, we don't ever get to explore ancient Hyrule, which is really gutting. In the actual time frame of Tears of the Kingdom, there have been some developments worth noting. The main one being that the Shrine of Resurrection is no longer there. It's still a cave, but it's more expansive now, and also a hideout of the Yiga clan. Hey fellas, you're a little late to try and catch Link whilst he was sleeping. The Yiga have also taken over the hut that the old man could once be found in. The king's grave atop Mount Hylia can now be found with a royal claymore beside it, the weapon the king was known to wield. Subtly, but definitely confirming that this is indeed his grave. A few caves have opened up around the plateau as well, now having the ability to drain the water from the original entranceway, revealing a mysterious statue that actually kicks off a wee interesting side quest. But probably my favourite bit of lore development with the plateau is what we find in the depths directly below the Shrine of Resurrection. This is the Spring of Revival, water that when swimming or submerged within, slowly heals you, like the hot springs found on Death Mountain. It's quite possible that this magical water was part of what healed Link over the course of 100 years, as we see water draining from around him when we start our adventure in Breath of the Wild. Perhaps it was sourced from down here. That water might just be the very same, using its healing properties to bring the hero back to full health.